He didn't say it loudly. He didn't shout it. He didn't threaten. He didn't beg. He looked the most powerful woman in that room. Dead in the eyes, a woman whose signature moved hundreds of millions of dollars and said two words that would change everything. "I'll help you." Nobody understood what those words would cost him. And when it was all over, when the mountain had done everything it could to break them, he just disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. No name in any official report. Just gone. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to see where this one goes. Ethan Cole threw the emergency radio onto the folding table, hard enough that one of Claire Morgan's senior executives actually flinched backward out of his chair. The radio bounced once, skidded across the aluminum surface, and came to rest directly in front of Claire's coffee cup. Nobody in the room said a word. Ethan kept his voice low, not because he was trying to be polite, because in his experience, the quieter you stayed when something was genuinely wrong, the more seriously people took you. And this situation was very, very wrong. That, he said, pointing at the radio without touching it, is the only primary communication device your company assigned to this expedition. The one thing standing between your group and complete silence if something goes bad out there. He paused. Just long enough. Open it. Claire Morgan looked at the radio. Then she looked at him. She was 50 years old, sharp-eyed, with the kind of composure that doesn't come from acting school. It comes from decades of boardrooms, where every wrong move costs real money. She had built her company from a 40-person operation in Denver into one of the largest outdoor development corporations in North America. She had sat across from U.S. senators, bank chairmen, and private equity firms that managed more capital than most small countries. She was not accustomed to being told what to do. Certainly not by a contract hire. "Mr. Cole," she said, keeping her voice measured, "I appreciate your diligence. But we have a departure schedule and a board." "Open it," he said again. Same quiet tone. Same expression. One of her executives, a tall man in a $300 fleece jacket named Derek Harlan, cleared his throat. He had the practiced smoothness of someone who'd spent his entire career managing difficult conversations by simply redirecting them. "Ms. Morgan, the team is ready and we really should be." "Derek." Ethan didn't look at him. "Sit down." Derek didn't sit. But he stopped. Claire held Ethan's gaze for a moment. Something calculated behind her eyes. Then she reached across the table and opened the radio casing. The battery compartment was corroded. Green and white oxidation had eaten through like rust through an old truck frame. One of the batteries had swollen and split at the seam. This device hadn't functioned in months. The room went completely quiet. Ethan watched Claire's face. He didn't say "I told you so." Didn't need to. He had filed a detailed written report 14 days ago, 14 pages, organized by category, with photographs itemizing every piece of failing or missing equipment assigned to this trail corridor. He had submitted it through proper channels. He had followed every single protocol. He had received exactly 0 responses. "We have backup devices," Derek said, recovering quickly. His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who had talked his way out of serious problems his entire professional life. "Satellite GPS units, personal cell phones, and the company issued. Cell coverage ends 2 miles past the trailhead," Ethan said. He finally turned to look directly at Derek. "Satellite GPS tells you where you are. It cannot call for help, and the backup devices in your supply crate." He walked to the corner of the room, picked up a heavy green equipment bag, set it on the table, without asking permission, and unzipped it. "We're packed for a spring expedition. It's September. The sleeping bag temperature ratings are wrong for overnight conditions at this elevation. The emergency blankets are insufficient. And the first aid kit is missing 2 critical components that I specifically identified in my report." He set the report on the table. 14 pages, dated, highlighted. Claire picked it up. She went quiet. Ethan watched her eyes move across the first page. Derek stepped forward. His voice came out smooth and measured. "The weather forecast is clear through Thursday. We'll complete the inspection by Tuesday afternoon." This report, while certainly thorough, addresses edge case scenarios that are statistically unlikely given the current weather window. Ethan turned to Derek slowly, fully. How many people have you pulled off a mountain? Derek blinked. I'm sorry, how many? Total. In your entire career. How many times have you been the last thing standing between a human being and a bad death in the backcountry? Derek didn't answer. Because Derek had never been anywhere near that situation. I've done it 23 times, Ethan said. 11 of those were because someone trusted a weather forecast. He looked back at Claire. The forecast says clear through Thursday. The barometric pressure in this valley says something different. And in my experience, the mountain doesn't care about your schedule. Claire set the report down. She looked at the broken radio. She looked at Ethan. For a moment, just one moment, Hath thought she was going to do the right thing. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. Something shifted behind her eyes. The board, probably. Or the investors. Or the lawyers watching the acquisition timeline. We continue, she said, but I want the equipment deficiencies addressed before we leave. Ethan looked at her steadily. The radio cannot be repaired in the next 2 hours. Then we proceed without a primary radio and ensure all satellite units are fully charged. Miss Morgan, Mr. Cole, her voice had edges in it now. Precise, controlled edges. The kind of edges that had probably ended careers. I'm not asking for your agreement. I'm asking for your professional support of this expedition. That is what your contract specifies. Can you fulfill that obligation? Or should we terminate the agreement this morning? The room held its breath. Ethan looked down at the broken radio on the table. He thought about Lily. She'd be home from school by 4 o'clock. He had promised her dinner. She'd texted him last night asking if he could make the pasta dish the one she'd called the good ones. Since she was 9. Which only meant it wasn't from a box. Should be home by Wednesday. He'd told her. Easy job. He looked back up at Claire Morgan. I'll fulfill the contract, he said. He picked up the equipment bag. But I want it documented in writing. Signed by you personally, that I formally recommended postponing the upper section of this expedition, and that you have overridden that recommendation by executive authority. Claire held his gaze. A beat. Fine, she said. Derek moved to object. Claire stopped him with a single look, the kind of look that required no words and left no room for negotiation. She pulled a notepad from her briefcase, wrote 4 lines, signed her name at the bottom, handed it to Ethan. He folded it once, clean and precise, and slipped it into the inside breast pocket of his jacket. Then, let's get your equipment sorted, he said, because we leave in 90 minutes. And if your people are going to be out on that mountain, they're going to be prepared for the mountain that actually exists, not the one on your forecast printout. Ethan Cole had not always been a man who worked quietly in small towns. There was an earlier version of him. A version that people in the wilderness rescue community had talked about, not because he'd sought that attention, because he never had, but because he was genuinely extraordinary at what he did, and in a field where extraordinary usually meant surviving, something that shouldn't have been survivable. That carried weight. He had spent 8 years as a field commander for a high-altitude search and rescue organization operating across the Southern Rockies. His team got called into situations so far outside normal parameters that most experienced professionals refused the assignments on principle. He had pulled climbers off sheer vertical faces in zero-visibility whiteout conditions. He had hiked 18 miles through 2 feet of fresh powder to reach a downed small aircraft, assessed the scene alone, and then carried a surviving passenger out on his back across terrain that the incident report later described as not considered passable under those conditions. He had once managed a 5-person extraction operation for 3 consecutive days without sleep in weather that the National Weather Service had rated as presenting life-threatening exposure risk. He had been, in the specific language of that world, the person you called when everyone else had already failed. He had also been a man who came home to empty rooms. His marriage hadn't made it through his career. He'd had enough years since then to accept that without resentment. His ex-wife, Rachel, had been strong enough to love him through 6 of those years, and honest enough to tell him exactly why she was leaving. "You're a good man, Ethan," she'd said on that last morning. "I've never doubted that. But you're going to love this job until it kills you. And I can't keep holding my breath every time you walk out the door." She'd taken their daughter. Lily had been 4 years old. He'd spent the next 3 years eating cheap food in motel rooms and sleeping in his truck on Forest Service roads. And when he finally came home, really came back, not just between assignments, Lily was 7. She stood in the doorway of Rachel's apartment with one small hand holding the doorframe, looking at him with eyes that were curious and careful and not yet sure whether to trust what they were seeing. He quit within the month, retrained as an independent wilderness safety contractor. Shorter assignments, closer to home, significantly less pay. He found Hargrove, Colorado, small enough that Lily could ride her bike to school, quiet enough that nobody needed him to be anything other than what he was. He moved there and started over. He rebuilt things with Lily, the same way he approached every problem in the field systematically, patiently, without expecting anything to happen fast. He learned her teachers' names. He remembered her homework deadlines. He sat through school plays that ran 40 minutes long and felt like 90. He sat through the moods that arrived, without warning, the way weather systems do in the mountains. He stayed. It took time. But eventually, she trusted him. He became her dad. And in the 3 years since, he had been very deliberate about taking only assignments simple enough to guarantee he'd be standing outside that school before she finished her last class. This one had looked simple. 1 executive inspection tour. Pre-scouted property. 1 night maximum in the field. Clear forecast. Well-funded corporation. Easy money for easy work. He had taken it because it was supposed to be safe. They left the staging area at 10 in the morning. Claire's group numbered 6. Herself, Derek Harlan, and 4 other company executives whose profiles Ethan assessed in the first 15 minutes and filed away in the practical part of his mind that always ran threat analysis, whether he was being paid for it or not. Marcus Webb, VP of Operations Tight Energy, constantly checking his watch. The type who pushed through pain signals until the body stopped asking politely and started demanding. Diane Cho, Director of Finance, quietest person in the group, moved efficiently, made eye contact when spoken to, most likely to follow instructions without her ego complicating things. Todd Reeves, Head of Corporate Development, loud, already complaining about the weight of the supply pack he'd been assigned before they'd walked a quarter. Immediate liability. The kind of man whose body would quit before his pride would admit it. Sandra Park, Head of Legal, calm, physically fit, wore proper trail boots that showed actual use. Ethan made a mental note of her as the second most functional person in the group after himself, and then Claire Morgan. She set a hard pace at the front immediately. Too hard. Ethan clocked it within 20 minutes, said nothing, gave her 10 more minutes to see if she'd self-correct, and then moved up beside her. Slow down, he said. She didn't break stride. I'm targeting the upper marker by noon. You're going to burn your energy reserves in the first 2 hours and be moving on empty before we hit elevation. Slow down. I run 5 miles every morning, Mr. Cole. On flat pavement, near sea level, in controlled conditions. He matched her pace without effort. This is none of those things. Slow down, or I'll be carrying you out of here before sunset. That's not a figure of speech. She glanced at him sideways. I'm serious, he said. She slowed down, he said quietly, and dropped back to the rear of the group. She didn't respond, but she kept the slower pace. For the first hour, it was almost manageable. Claire had her phone out, dictating notes to herself about development potential, site access, infrastructure cost estimates. Derek walked beside her, doing what Derek consistently did, agreeing with everything she said, and embellishing where embellishment served him, and occasionally glancing back at Ethan with the particular expression of a man who had decided the safety contractor was probably being dramatic. Todd complained about his boots. Marcus checked his watch every 11 minutes. Diane walked quietly and observed everything. Sandra moved well and asked no unnecessary questions. Ethan watched all of them, the tree line, the sky, and the ground simultaneously. It was a skill built over years, that kind of distributed attention. It didn't feel like effort anymore. It was just how he moved through the world when the world had the potential to go wrong. He found the first damaged trail marker at 40 minutes. A split wooden post, partially collapsed, pointing 11 degrees off true. He stopped, pulled flagging tape from his vest pocket, corrected the mark, and kept moving. He said nothing to the group. He'd learned early in his rescue career that announcing every problem to civilians usually generated panic in situations where panic itself was the primary danger. You fixed what was fixable. You monitored what wasn't. You stayed calm so that they could stay calm. He found a second damaged marker 10 minutes after that. The third one was missing entirely. He photographed each location, updated his internal map. The weather was the thing, though. The thing that mattered most, and that nobody else in this group was equipped to read. The sky above the trail looked exactly the way a clear September day in the Colorado Rockies was supposed to look blue-white, high altitude, cold and clean. If you weren't trained, you'd see nothing but a good day. But Ethan had been watching the far ridgeline for the past hour. The pressure was dropping. He felt it, in the way the wind direction was shifting in small, inconsistent ways, backing and filling in a pattern that didn't match what the surface conditions should have been producing. It was the kind of shift that didn't show up on consumer weather applications for another 6 to 8 hours all minimum. Old wilderness hands called it the mountain thinking about it. The mountain, in Ethan's experience, thought about it for about as long as it took to decide, and then it acted. He pulled his personal barometer from his vest pocket, checked the reading, checked it again. He didn't like what he saw. At the 2-hour mark, they stopped for water and food. Claire unwrapped a protein bar, ate half of it, and tucked the other half back into her jacket pocket. Ethan watched her do it. "Eat the rest of it," he said. She looked up. "You've burned more calories than you think. Elevation does that. It accelerates your metabolic rate and masks your hunger response. Your body is working harder than it feels like it is. Eat the whole bar and drink another full water bottle."
"I'm not hungry. I didn't ask if you were hungry."
"I'm telling you to eat." Derek looked up sharply from his own lunch. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Morgan is more than capable of managing her own nutritional intake." Derek. Ethan's tone hadn't changed in any way that was obvious, but Derek stopped. "The last person I watched ignore food and water at this altitude ended up on a stretcher with a core temperature of 93 degrees. I hiked 11 miles carrying them out." He looked back at Claire. "Eat the bar." Claire held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she ate the bar. Then she drank the water. Ethan nodded once, not approval, just acknowledgement, and went back to watching the horizon. Todd had taken his boot off and was examining his heel with the expression of a man who had just discovered something tragic. "I've got a blister starting," he announced, as though the group needed a status update. "Take care of it right now," Ethan said, moving toward him. "Don't let it develop." He pulled medical tape from his kit and wrapped Todd's heel with the efficient precision of someone who had done it hundreds of times. Todd looked mildly surprised, as though he'd expected to be lectured rather than helped. "Tighten your laces on the way up," Ethan said. "Loosen them on the descent. The friction pattern changes with direction." "How do you know exactly where they'll blister?" Todd asked. "Same spot on everyone," Ethan said, standing. "Doesn't matter how much they cost." Todd almost smiled. They reached the upper overlook at noon. Claire walked to the edge and looked out at the property stretching below. Something changed in her face, not the CEO calculation she'd been running since she arrived, but something older and simpler underneath it, something that looked like it might have been there before all the board meetings and acquisition deals and years of building something enormous from nothing. It looked like wonder. She didn't say anything. Ethan stood beside her. "Beautiful country," he said. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." Her satellite communicator buzzed. Board meeting notification. Even up here, the machine followed her. She turned back into herself. "Can we reach the upper marker by 1:30? She asked. "We can," Ethan said. "But look at this first." He showed her his barometer reading. Explained, calmly and precisely, what the numbers meant and what they predicted. She listened. He would give her credit for that. When she chose to listen, she listened well. "Your forecast shows clear conditions," she said when he finished. "My barometer says something's building, and the forecast didn't have access to what I've been watching on that ridgeline for the last 2 hours. You're recommending we turn back. I'm recommending we don't push to the upper section today. You've seen enough of the lower property for a solid preliminary report. We come back in 2 days, with working equipment and a clean weather window. We do this right." She looked toward the upper ridgeline. Then Derek appeared at her shoulder, as if on cue. "The upper section is critical to the acquisition valuation," he said smoothly. "Without it, the board won't authorize the full appraisal. The deal structure could collapse entirely." "It could," Ethan said, looking at Derek. "Or you could schedule a proper return trip and do it safely." "The sellers won't hold the property past this week," Derek said. "Then the deal collapses," Ethan said simply. "That's a better outcome than some of your people not walking back out of here." Derek turned to Claire with the practiced calm of a man who had spent decades managing executives in moments like this. "We have professional safety support. We have supplies. We have shelter capability if conditions deteriorate. The risk is manageable." Ethan turned to look at Derek. It was a particular kind of look, completely flat, completely calm, built from years of watching people underestimate exactly this kind of situation. "Manageable," he repeated. "Yes," Derek said. "Derek," Ethan's voice stayed level. "Have you ever watched a person's body shut down from hypothermia? Watched them go from confused to unresponsive in 40 minutes? Derek said nothing. "Have you ever done chest compressions on a mountainside for 45 minutes, knowing the helicopter is still 90 miles out? Silence. "Have you ever had to call a family and tell them that someone they loved didn't make it back because someone at a table made a decision and called the risk manageable?" The group was very still. Ethan looked back at Claire. "It's your call," he said. "It's always been your call. But you hired me to tell you the truth, and that's what I'm doing." Claire looked at the upper ridgeline, looked at Derek, looked at Ethan. Her phone buzzed again. The mountain was utterly indifferent to all of it. "We continue," she said. "We push to the upper section. We adjust pace and stay together." Ethan looked at her for one more moment. He didn't argue, didn't try to override her. That wasn't his call to make. He turned, and for just a second, he looked at the far ridge where the cloud line was building faster than it should have been, moving with the particular quiet urgency of weather that had already made up its mind. He tightened the straps on his old backpack, methodical, unhurried. "Then hear me clearly," he said, turning back to the group. "Nobody moves more than 20 feet ahead of me. Nobody falls more than 20 feet behind. If I stop, you stop immediately. If I say we turn around, no vote, no discussion, no executive override." He looked directly at Derek. "Is that understood?" Derek opened his mouth. Ethan waited. "Understood," Derek said. Ethan looked at Claire. "Understood," she said. And this time, her voice had something different in it. Something that almost sounded like it was paying attention. Ethan turned toward the upper trail. He didn't feel heroic. He felt the way he always felt in these moments, like a man who could see clearly in conditions where everyone else was going blind. Moving toward a place where the lights were already starting to go out, counting down everything that was about to go wrong so that he could be in position when it did. Lily would be home from school at 4. He hoped she'd eat something before he called. He hoped the satellite phone had enough signal to reach her from wherever they ended up tonight. He began walking. The group fell in behind him, and the mountain, patient and indifferent and enormous, began to close in. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see where this story travels. And stay with us. The mountain isn't finished yet. The trail above the overlook was different in ways that Ethan registered immediately and said nothing about. It was narrower than the lower section. The rock substrate shifted from packed dirt and granite to something looser, decomposed shale that crumbled at the edge when you leaned into a step wrong. The trees thinned out, which meant the wind had nothing to slow it down once it started moving through. And the wind was already starting to move through, in that backing, uncertain pattern that Ethan had been tracking since morning. Not hard yet, not alarming in any way, layperson would identify. Just present, feeling things out. He'd watched enough mountains make decisions to understand what this particular feeling meant. It was 12:47 in the afternoon. He kept moving, kept watching, kept counting. Todd Reeves lasted 11 minutes before he started breathing hard enough that Ethan could hear it from his position at the front of the group. Not the normal hard breathing of exertion, the specific, shallow, rapid pattern of a man whose body was working significantly harder than his ego was willing to acknowledge. Ethan slowed his pace by 8% without announcement. Just enough. The group adjusted without realizing it. "You doing all right back there, Todd?" Ethan called, not turning around. "Fine," Todd said immediately. The word came out in a single compressed breath that meant the opposite. "Drink water," Ethan said. "I'm fine," I said. "I know what you said. Drink the water." A pause. The sound of a bottle cap. Ethan nodded to himself and kept walking. Claire was directly behind him, moving with the careful, controlled energy of a woman who was absolutely not going to let anyone see that she was struggling. He'd watched people walk like that before, the specific biomechanics of pride overriding physical feedback. He could see it in the shortened stride, the slight forward lean that was just a degree too aggressive for the grade, the way she placed her feet with a precision that was just a little too deliberate to be natural. She was compensating. Her body was starting to send signals she was choosing to ignore. "Ms. Morgan," he said quietly, without slowing. "Claire," she said. "At this point, just call me Claire." "Claire, how are your legs feeling?" "Like legs. Any cramping? Tightness in the calves?" A beat of silence. "Just long enough." "Slight," she admitted. "Lower left calf." It wasn't nothing. Early stage muscle cramping at this elevation, in a person who hadn't eaten enough and was marginally dehydrated. At the beginning of a 2-hour climb, was the body broadcasting a preview of what was coming? Like the mountain, the body told you what it planned to do before it did it, if you were paying attention. He reached into his vest pocket without breaking stride and passed back an electrolyte packet. "Mix that into your water right now. All of it." She took it without arguing. He heard her open the bottle, tear the packet, shake it. Progress. They climbed for another 20 minutes. The trail switchbacked across the face of the upper slope, in long, angled runs that gave back the altitude you'd earned with every turn and demanded you earn it again. It was the kind of terrain that destroyed people who underestimated it, not because it was technically difficult, but because it was psychologically relentless. Every time you thought you were close, the trail bent away and revealed more. It never stopped asking. At 1:15 in the afternoon, Marcus Webb's satellite GPS unit lost its lock. "That's normal up here," Derek said immediately, from 2 places back in the line. He said it with the confident authority of a man who had no actual basis for the statement. "They lose signal in canyon terrain." "We're not in canyon terrain," Ethan said. He held out his hand for the unit without stopping walking. Marcus handed it forward. Ethan looked at the screen, tapped through 2 menus, looked at the signal status. "Low battery," he said. "It's been on since this morning, hasn't it?" The silence from Marcus answered the question. "We have 6 people and 1 functioning GPS unit," Ethan said, passing the device back to Marcus. "Turn off the screen. Use it only to verify position if we need to navigate. Don't run background applications. Don't leave it on continuously." He looked back over his shoulder at the group. "Who else has a satellite device?" Sandra Park raised her hand. "I have a personal locator beacon, registered to my home address." "Good. Keep it in your outer pocket. Accessible. Don't let it get wet." He looked at Derek. "Phone?" "Full charge this morning," Derek said. "But signal's already gone." "Everyone's signal is gone," Ethan said. "That's been true since the first mile and a half. You were just still in range of the cell tower, on the southern ridge. We've been past that for 40 minutes. Derek started to say something. "I know," Ethan said. "You have questions. Save them for camp." They kept moving. The wind picked up at 1:40 in the afternoon. Not dramatically. Not the way it would in a movie, with leaves swirling and trees bending. It came up quietly, steadily, the way real weather moved, not announcing itself, just arriving. It pushed against the left side of the group and dropped the ambient temperature by what Ethan estimated at 7 degrees in 15 minutes. He checked his thermometer. He was right. It had been 61 degrees at the overlook. It was 54 now. He checked his barometer. The number was worse than it had been an hour ago. He stopped walking. "Group," he said. Everyone stopped. There was a certain training response that had started to build in the group over the past 2 hours. Whenever Ethan stopped and used that flat, specific tone, the body understood before the mind did that something was happening. "I want everyone to add a layer right now. Whatever you have in your pack. Put it on." "It's not that cold," Todd said. His face was flushed, but his hands were pale at the fingertips. He didn't know that meant anything. "Your hands are cold," Ethan said. Todd looked at his hands. "Extremities cold before core," Ethan said. "Your body is already redistributing blood to protect vital organs. That's a physiological fact, not a suggestion. Add a layer." Nobody argued this time. Packs opened. Layers came out. Ethan watched each person dress while simultaneously watching the sky over the upper ridge. The cloud line that had been a smudge on the horizon this morning was now a full column, moving, with a purpose that weather systems express only when they've gathered enough energy to stop being subtle about their intentions. He looked at his watch. 1:52. They had maybe 2 hours before this became serious. Maybe less. He made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not one that announced itself as significant. A quiet recalibration of priorities. The upper marker was no longer the objective. Getting this group to a defensible position before the weather closed in was the objective. He'd find a way to tell Claire that in a manner she could accept. He'd been finding ways to tell people the truth in a manner they could accept for over a decade. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. "We're adjusting the route," he said. Claire looked at him. "Adjusting how?" "Instead of pushing to the upper section, we're targeting the flat bench, about 40 minutes above us. There's a rock formation there that provides wind protection. We evaluate from there and make a decision about forward movement based on conditions." It was the truth. It was also a version of the truth that Claire's brain could process without triggering the defensive architecture that had been refusing to hear bad news all day. She studied him. She wasn't easy to manage, and he knew she understood what he was doing. But she said, "Lead the way." Derek started. "The upper marker is not going anywhere," Claire said, without looking at him. "Let's move." Ethan turned and started walking. Inside his chest, something that had been coiled tight loosened by exactly 1 degree. 1 degree wasn't much, but it was something. They made the bench at 2:32 in the afternoon. The rock formation was a natural overhang, 12 feet deep, with a wide flat floor of packed earth and gravel. The kind of formation that experienced wilderness travelers recognized as a gift terrain that offered shelter where the terrain didn't owe you any. Ethan moved through it quickly, checking for water intrusion, animal sign, structural instability. It was clean. It would do. "Sit down," he told the group. "Everyone, off your feet." He was already moving through his pack as they settled, pulling the emergency blanket, the fire kit, the water purification tablets, the medical kit, the rations, organizing, evaluating, counting resources against projected need. That was when he heard it. Not a crash, not a shout, just a single quiet sound, the specific sound of a body going down, the thud of a pack hitting rock, the involuntary exhale of someone who'd been holding something together for a long time and just ran out of something to hold it with. He turned around. Claire Morgan was on the ground. She had not slipped. She had not tripped. Her body had simply reached the end of what it was willing to do on sheer determination and stopped. Her legs had folded. She was sitting against the rock wall, with her knees drawn up, her head down, and her breathing wrong, in a way that took Ethan 2 steps toward her to analyze. Rapid. Shallow. The rhythm was off. Claire. He was at her side before the rest of the group had even fully registered what had happened. He crouched directly in front of her and put 2 fingers to her pulse point. "Look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were present but unfocused. The calculation was gone. The CEO was gone. What was left was something much simpler, a 50-year-old woman, sitting on a cold rock in a mountain she hadn't been prepared for, looking at the one person in the group she'd treated as the least important, and finding that he was the only one who had moved toward her. "Tell me what you feel," he said. Not demanded. "Said quietly." "Dizzy," she said. Her voice was thin. "My hands are. I can't feel my hands properly. Okay." He was already unwrapping the emergency blanket, draping it over her shoulders, tucking it in. "That's okay. Breathe slower. Follow my pace." He breathed out, long and deliberate, like that. "Matt," she tried. Didn't quite get there. Tried again. Behind him, Derek's voice arrived at volume. "We need to keep moving. If she rests and her core temperature drops further, Derek." Ethan didn't turn around. "Sit down and be quiet. I'm trying to help." "You're adding to her stress response." Every raised voice in this space right now is making her condition worse. Sit down a beat. Please. The please surprised everyone, including Derek. It worked the way the please was meant to work, not as softness, but as a precision tool. The argument deflated. Derek sat. Ethan looked back at Claire. Are you nauseous? A little. Headache? Yes. Behind my eyes. Since maybe an hour ago. You should have told me. I thought it was stress. It's altitude and dehydration working together. Your blood pressure dropped. That's why you went down. He pulled a water bottle, opened it, handed it to her. Small sips. Consistent. Don't gulp. She took the bottle. Todd had his head down. Marcus was staring at his phone like signal might appear if he watched long enough. Sandra had moved closer to Claire without being asked, sitting 2 feet away, saying nothing, just being present. Ethan noted it without commenting. Derek pulled out his satellite GPS unit and turned on the screen. Turn it off, Ethan said. I'm checking our position. I know our position. Turn it off. You're running the battery down. Morgan, if Claire needs evacuation, you activate Sandra's personal locator beacon and you wait. That's the protocol. The GPS is for navigation, not rescue signaling. Turn it off. Derek turned it off. His hands were shaking slightly. Ethan saw it and decided not to address it directly. Derek's fear was a liability, but only if it escalated. Keeping him occupied, without keeping him in charge, was the balance point. Derek. In the blue equipment bag there are 2 protein bar packages and a small camp stove kit. Get them out. Derek moved to do it. Purposeful task. Controlled environment. The fear receded to a functional level. Good enough. At 2:50 in the afternoon, the wind hit the rock formation hard enough that everyone felt it even under the overhang. It wasn't what Ethan would call dangerous wind. Not yet. But it had crossed the line from aggressive weather into something with a message in it. The temperature had dropped another 4 degrees in the last 20 minutes. His thermometer read 49. The cloud column he'd been watching had consumed the upper ridgeline entirely. The sky above them was a medium gray with darker structure moving inside it, not the flat gray of general overcast, but the layered, organized gray of something building. Ethan, Claire's voice, steadier now. The sips of water, the warmth of the blanket, the drop in stress response from Derek's silence, all of it was adding up incrementally. Yeah, he said, not looking up from the stove kit he was organizing. How bad is it? It wasn't a question. It was a request for truth from someone who'd spent the last several hours making decisions based on something other than truth and was now sitting in the consequences of that and ready to hear what was actually real. He looked at her. She met his eyes steadily. The weather system I flagged this morning accelerated, he said. It's going to hit us within the next hour. Probably less. Temperature is going to keep dropping and the wind is going to get stronger. How much stronger? I don't know, he said. And that's the honest answer. Can we get back down? He paused. 1 second. Not the way we came. Not safely. The lower trail goes exposed across the south face for about a 1/4 mile. In this wind, with this group, that stretch is too dangerous. Claire absorbed that. So we stay here, she said. We stay here. This formation is solid. It provides adequate wind protection. I can get a heat source going. We have enough rations and water purification capability to manage one night comfortably if we're disciplined about consumption. She nodded slowly. What do you need from us? It was the first time all day she'd asked that question. He registered it. Didn't respond to it beyond the practical. Your cooperation, he said. Not questions, not debates, not executive decisions. You follow my lead completely for the next 12 hours. Whatever I tell you, you do. Whatever I tell you to stop, you stop. Agreed, she said. He looked at her carefully. I mean it, Claire. Out here right now, this is not a corporation. There's no board. There's no acquisition. There's no hierarchy, except the one that keeps people alive. Can you work within that? She met his eyes. She said. And she meant it. He believed her. Behind him, Todd was making sounds that suggested he was about to reach some kind of emotional limit. Ethan stood turned, walked to him without urgency. Talk to me, Ethan said. This is insane, Todd said. His voice had the quality of a man who had moved through embarrassment and arrived somewhere beyond it. Somewhere rawer. I have a 7-year-old at home. I have a daughter. My wife doesn't even know exactly where we are. I didn't think, Todd. Ethan put a hand on his shoulder. Firm. Grounding. Look at me. Todd looked up. Your daughter is going to see you again, Ethan said. That's not a promise I make casually. I know what I'm doing out here. But I need you to stay functional. Can you do that? Todd's jaw tightened. He was not a man who was used to being scared in any way that mattered. Minor professional fears, budget crisis, boardroom pressure, those he'd navigated for years. This was a different category of fear. Entirely, the kind the body generates when it recognizes that something genuinely irreversible might be approaching. I can do that, Todd said. Good. I need you to help me collect any standing rainwater we can get from the rock surfaces outside the formation. We've got containers. Can you manage that? Yes. Go. Be careful at the edge. Stay in contact with the rock face. Todd got up and moved with the focused energy of a man who was relieved to have something concrete to do. Ethan had learned that about scared people. Years ago, they didn't need reassurance nearly as much as they needed a task. Give someone something to do with their hands, and their brain stopped writing disaster narratives long enough to be useful. At 3:15 in the afternoon, the rain started. Not dramatic rain, not cinematic rain, small, cold, steady rain that arrived without ceremony and settled in like it planned to stay for a while. It hit the rock formation and ran sideways in thin sheets, driven by the wind into the back wall of the overhang. Claire had been sitting quietly for 20 minutes. Her color was better. Her breathing was normal. She was watching Ethan work, organizing, rationing, checking on each person, adjusting the emergency sheltering setup with a methodical attention that she had not been able to appreciate when they'd been walking because she'd been too busy managing everything else, and now she had nothing to manage, and watching him was what filled the space. She watched him check on Marcus quietly, ask 2 questions, nod, move on. Watched him show Sandra how to properly position her emergency blanket for maximum thermal retention without being condescending about the instruction. Watched him redistribute the food supply with a fairness that was completely divorced from any awareness of who these people were professionally. She was worth considerably more than all of them combined. The mountain didn't know that, and neither, apparently, did Ethan Cole. You've done this before, she said, when he came back to her side. Many times, he said. How many times have you been in a situation where it was, she stopped, recalibrated, where it turned serious? Serious like this, or serious like worse than this? She looked at him. Worse. He was quiet for a moment. In the background, the rain increased its tempo slightly, and the wind made a sound against the rock that was not threatening, but was definitely not comfortable. More times than I'd like to count, he said. And everyone got out. The pause before his answer was 1 beat too long. Not everyone, he said. 3 times, in 11 years, 3 people didn't come home. The weight of that number sat between them without elaboration. I'm sorry, Claire said. So am I, he said. Every single day. It was the first completely unguarded thing she'd heard him say, and it landed differently than the professional competence she'd been watching all day. It sounded like something that had been carried a long time. She recognized that particular sound. She'd heard it in her own voice, in the rare moments when she let herself be honest about the cost of the life she'd built. She looked down at her hands, wrapped around the warm water bottle. My board thinks I'm closing the acquisition today. I know. The sellers have a competing offer. Expires Thursday. I know that too, he said. You mentioned it 3 separate times in the first hour. She almost smiled. Was I that transparent? You were under pressure. Pressure makes people repeat themselves. She was quiet for a moment. The rain kept on. I read your report, she said. The one you submitted 2 weeks ago. He looked at her. Not all of it. Derek summarized it for me. He said he characterized it as overly cautious. Standard contractor hedging. Derek has never been responsible for anyone's life, Ethan said. Contractors hedge. Risk managers hedge. People who've pulled bodies off mountains stop hedging. She absorbed that. I should have read it myself, she said. That's on me. Yes, he said simply. No softening. No diplomatic mitigation. Just acknowledgement of a fact. She noticed that he didn't protect her from it, and she found somewhat to her surprise, that she was grateful for that. She'd spent 20 years in boardrooms where every piece of hard truth came wrapped in so many layers of corporate softness that by the time it reached her, it was barely recognizable. This man just said the thing that was true. She wasn't used to it, but she was starting to understand the value of it. At 3:47 in the afternoon, the emergency radio that Marcus had been quietly attempting to coax back to life since their shelter stop finally died completely. The corrosion that Ethan had identified that morning had finished what it had started. The battery gave out with a sound, somewhere between a click and a sigh. And then there was nothing. Marcus looked up. His expression was the careful blank of a man, trying to decide how to report bad news to someone who didn't want to hear it. He looked at Ethan. "Radio's gone," he said. The group went very still. Ethan didn't react. He'd expected this. Had been operating on the assault of this since he'd opened the battery compartment that morning and seen the corrosion. He nodded once, went back to the camp stove, adjusted the flame. Todd looked up from his position near the water collection containers. "What does that mean?" What does that mean in terms of? "It means we use the personal locator beacon if we need emergency evacuation," Ethan said. "Which we don't. Not yet. What we have right now is an unplanned overnight shelter situation. That's manageable. We have food, water, heat capability, and adequate protection from the elements. A locator beacon is for when we have a medical emergency or a situation that requires immediate extraction. This is neither. But it means nobody knows exactly where we are," Todd said. "The staging coordinator knows our general route," Ethan said. "Our vehicle is at the trailhead. If we're not back by tomorrow morning, standard search protocol activates within 4 hours. If we're not back by tomorrow morning," Derek repeated. His voice had shifted from executive smooth into something more brittle. "We were supposed to be back tonight. We're not going to be back tonight," Ethan said. "That's the situation." Derek stopped himself. Something in his face worked through a process that Ethan watched with the clinical interest of a man who had seen pride lose arguments with reality many times. "Okay," Derek said finally. "Okay, so we wait," Ethan said. "And in the morning?" "In the morning, we assess conditions and make a decision about movement. That's as far ahead as we plan right now." At 4:15 in the afternoon, Ethan's satellite phone flickered to 1 bar. He'd been checking it every 30 minutes. The timing was consistent with the way satellite coverage worked. In this terrain, windows opened and closed unpredictably based on orbital positioning and atmospheric interference. A 1-bar window could last 30 seconds or 30 minutes. He had learned not to trust them, but always to use them. He stepped to the edge of the overhang, into the rain, and dialed. 3 rings. "Dad?" Lily's voice came through with the specific clarity of a satellite connection, almost too crisp, slightly inhuman, with a half-second delay that made everything feel urgent. "Hey, Bug, you sound weird. Is the signal bad? Are you still on the mountain?" "Still on the mountain," he said. "Listen, I'm not going to make it home tonight." The weather changed. A pause on her end. She was 14, old enough to understand what that meant, having grown up the daughter of a man who worked outdoors. Old enough to have her own internal risk calculator. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable," he said. "Nothing I haven't handled before." "Dad." "What?" "Don't do the thing where you make it sound smaller than it is." He closed his eyes for 1 second. "I'm with a group," he said. "We have shelter and food and water. I'm the most experienced person out here by a significant margin. I have everything I need. Are you going to be okay?" "Yes," he said. "I'm going to be okay." "Promise?" It was the one word he had never let himself say casually. Not since she was 7. Not since he'd understood what it cost when a man who said that word casually failed to keep it. "I'm going to be okay," he said again. Not the word she wanted. The truth instead. She knew what that meant. Had known for years. "Okay," she said quietly. "Be careful, Dad. Always. You eat dinner something real, not cereal." "I had pasta," she said. And he could hear the smile in it, and it hurt in the specific way that love and distance always combined at the worst moments. "Good," he said. "I'll be home tomorrow." The signal dropped. He stood in the rain for a moment. Just a moment. Then he turned around and went back to work. By 5 o'clock, the wind had stopped pretending. It came through the rock formation with a consistent, organized pressure that made the emergency blankets crack and flutter and required the group to hold them at the edges. The temperature had dropped to 41 degrees. The rain had not intensified, but it had not relented either, the kind of steady, cold, purposeful precipitation that mountain weather systems sustain for hours and sometimes days. Ethan had the camp stove running, a controlled heat source for warming water. He'd identified which of the food supplies were most calorie-dense and would generate the most internal heat. He'd reorganized the group's positions inside the formation bodies, close together, blankets layered, direct ground contact minimized with the pack frames positioned underneath the most vulnerable individuals. He moved through all of it without theater. And Claire watched him. She had been watching for the past hour with the quiet attention of someone who had arrived at a new kind of clarity. Not the clarity she was used to board meetings, acquisition strategy, financial modeling. A different kind. The kind the mountain enforced. She called it, somewhere in the back of her mind, the clarity of consequence. Out here, decisions had immediate and physical outcomes. You made a wrong call and the cold told you. You ignored a warning and your body responded. There was no delay between decision and feedback. No quarterly report that softened the numbers. No communication department to manage the narrative. It was direct. It was unambiguous. It was terrifying. And it was, she recognized slowly, the most honest environment she had been in for years. Ethan, she said. He was wrapping Marcus's hands with the last of the thermal tape. He finished before looking up. Yeah. Why aren't you angry with me? He looked at her steadily. About what? You warned me. Multiple times. In writing and in person. I overrode every warning. We're all up here because I chose a deal over sound judgment. You have every reason to. Anger doesn't do anything useful right now, he said. That's not really an answer. He sat back, considered her for a moment, with the specific look of a man deciding how honest to be. I'm not angry, he said, because being angry at you up here is the same as being angry at a storm. The decision got made. It put us here. What matters now is what I do about where here is. He looked down at his hands. I'll have feelings about the rest of it later. Right now there's no room for them. She absorbed that. Do you compartmentalize everything? She asked. When I need to, he said. The feelings are there. I'm just not letting them drive right now. And later? When we're out. He was quiet for a moment. We'll see, he said. It wasn't the answer she expected. Which meant it was probably the true one. At 5:40 in the afternoon, Todd said it before anyone else was willing to. The trail we came up, he said. His voice was steady, the fear compressed into something functional. The task orientation Ethan had given him earlier had held better than expected. It's completely socked in up there. I can't see the upper trail at all anymore. Ethan didn't enter ward where Todd was looking. He'd already checked. He'd known for an hour. That's right, he said. Which means we're staying here tonight, Ethan said. I know. That's already the plan. No. Todd's voice changed slightly. Not panic. Not yet. But something tightening. Which means the lower trail. The one we came up on. If this keeps coming down all night, Ethan looked at him. Todd met his eyes. Is the lower trail going to be passable tomorrow morning? Todd asked. The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. In those 3 seconds, the wind pushed a gust through the formation, hard enough to rattle Sandra's blanket loose from her grip. The rain hit the rock with increased force. The temperature, by Ethan's estimate, was still dropping. I don't know, Ethan said, and that is the honest answer. And then every person in that group, even Derek, even with everything he'd spent all day protecting himself from, understood, for the first time, in their bodies rather than their minds, that the mountain had stopped being a backdrop and had become the only reality that mattered. Claire Morgan looked at Ethan Cole, not as an employee she'd hired and managed and was slightly irritated by, not as an obstacle to a timeline, not as a contractor whose warning she had documented and overridden. She looked at him the way a person looks at the one thing standing between them and the darkness, when the darkness is real and present and very, very close. And Ethan looked back at her, the way he always looked in these moments, steady, clear-eyed, without drama. The look of a man who was frightened in the specific, contained way that competent people are frightened. Not at the situation, but at the edges of the situation. At the small percentage chance that something could still go wrong beyond his capacity to manage it. He was frightened. He was also the most functional person on this mountain, by a margin wide enough to keep 6 people alive. He turned back to the stove. "Let's talk about how we're going to manage body heat through the night," he said. And one by one, shaking their heads or exhaling or simply going quiet, they all moved closer and listened. Nobody slept. That was the honest truth of it, and Ethan had known it would be before the sun went down. He'd been through enough unplanned wilderness overnights to understand that sleep was almost always the first casualty, not because the cold was unmanageable or the shelter inadequate, but because the human mind, once it understood that it was genuinely in danger, refused to power down. It kept running, kept calculating, kept producing worst-case scenarios in vivid, relentless detail. There was nothing to be done about it. You couldn't argue someone into sleep when their nervous system had decided that vigilance was the price of survival. So, Ethan managed the group through the night the way he managed everything else methodically, without drama, 1 hour at a time. He's assigned 2-hour awareness rotations. Not because he needed sentries, but because having a defined role gave each person a reason to stay mentally present instead of spiraling. Todd took the first rotation without being asked twice, which told Ethan that the earlier conversation had done its work. Marcus took the second, moving through it with the tight-wound energy of a man holding himself together through sheer deliberate effort, while Sandra managed hers with a quiet competence that Ethan had come to rely on by 6 in the evening without having to say so out loud. Derek's rotation was the problem he'd anticipated. Derek sat at the edge of the formation and checked his dead GPS unit every 7 minutes, with the particular persistence of a man who had decided that if he just kept looking at a device, the device would eventually give him what he wanted. Ethan let it go. Some coping mechanisms were harmless. This was one of them. Claire didn't take a rotation. Ethan made that call quietly, without announcing it. Her body had burned through too much reserve that afternoon. She needed the calories he'd fed her and the warmth he'd managed to generate in the shelter space to go toward physical recovery. He's not sustained alertness. He watched her from across the formation at 8:40 in the evening, the way she'd wrapped the emergency blanket around her shoulders and pulled her knees up and was staring at the rain coming in, past the edge of the overhang with an expression he recognized. Not fear exactly. Something more honest than fear. The specific look of a person who has run out of the ability to pretend that they have any control over what's happening, and is sitting in that understanding for possibly the first time in their adult life. He'd seen that look before. On cliffs, in ravines, in the back of helicopters. He'd seen it on the faces of people who'd spent years believing their competence was sufficient armor against anything the world could produce. Right at the moment, the world proved them wrong. It didn't diminish them. In his experience, it usually made them more real. At 9:15 in the evening, he moved to sit next to her. Not close enough to crowd her. Just close enough that she could hear him without raising her voice, which meant nobody else in the group needed to hear the conversation. "Your color's better," he said. "I feel better," she said, still embarrassed. "I collapsed," she said. "Your body reached its limit and responded accordingly," he said. "That's not collapse. That's physiology. You'd been ignoring signals for 6 hours. The body eventually stops sending signals and starts taking unilateral action." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been ignoring signals for longer than 6 hours," she said. "If I'm being completely honest." He didn't push that. It wasn't his territory. "Get some sleep if you can," he said. Starting to stand, "Ethan." Her voice stopped him. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Out there today, the whole time you were never afraid." He looked at her. "I was afraid," he said. She blinked. "You didn't look it, I know," he said. "That's a skill. Not the same thing as not feeling it." She absorbed that. "What were you afraid of?" He was quiet for 3 full seconds. "The same thing everyone out here was afraid of," he said. "I just had more experience, deciding what to do with the feeling, instead of letting it decide things for me." She looked at him for a long moment. "How do you do that?" "Practice," he said. "A lot of practice. In situations where the alternative to managing it was worse than whatever I was afraid of." "What kind of situations?" He looked toward the rain. "Go to sleep, Claire," he said, not unkindly. He moved back to his position at the center of the formation. It was 9:27 in the evening. He did not sleep either. He sat with his back against the rock, and his eyes moving between the group and the mouth of the formation, and the sky, beyond it, tracking the weather, tracking the people, tracking the dozen variables that determined whether this night ended manageable or ended something else entirely. The temperature had stabilized at 38 degrees, which was cold, but not medically critical, given the insulation he'd managed. Wind was consistent, but not escalating. The rain had thinned to a persistent mist in the last hour, which was either a break in the system or a transition to something worse. He wouldn't know which until morning. He thought about Lily. She'd be in bed. Probably actually in bed, because she'd said she would be. And she was 17 weeks past 14 now, which meant she was threading the needle between the child who kept promises without thinking about them, and the person who kept them, because she understood why they mattered. He'd watched that transition happen in slow motion over the past year, and felt about it the way he felt about most things that moved him quietly, from the inside, in a way he didn't put language to very often. He thought about the pasta she'd said she made. He thought about the way she said dad when she was genuinely worried about him. Not the teenage dad of mild exasperation or the performative dad of wanting something, but the real one, the two-syllable version with the slight downward inflection at the end that she'd been used since she was 6 and had apparently never unlearned. She'd used the real one on the satellite phone. He reached into his jacket pocket and checked the phone's battery. 14%. He turned it off. He'd need what was left in the morning. At 11:58 in the evening, the mountain made its decision. The sound was the thing that woke everyone who had managed any fraction of sleep, not a crash, not a roar, but a deep, rolling, sustained groan that came from somewhere above them and to the left. The kind of sound that geological structures make when stress that has been building for hours finally finds a release point. Ethan was on his feet before the sound finished, which meant before anyone else had fully understood what they'd heard. He moved to the edge of the formation. He listened. The sound rolled through for 4 seconds, then 5. Then it deepened, and he felt it more than heard it through the rock face behind him, through the soles of his boots, vibrating in the bones of his chest. Then it stopped. Complete silence for 2 seconds. Then the distant, specific percussion of rock and debris settling. Behind him, Todd's voice arrived tight and high. "What was that?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was listening. Not to the sound, which had stopped, but to what replaced it, the quality of the silence that came after. Whether it was the settled silence of something that had finished, or the held-breath silence of something that was pausing, it was the finished kind. He turned around. "Slope movement," he said. "Upper section. To the left of our position." "Slope movement," Derek repeated. "What does that?" "The saturated slope above the left trail face gave way," Ethan said. "The rain softened the substrate. The wind put lateral pressure on it. It let go. The group processed that. Sandra said it first, because Sandra processed information quickly and without the defensive delay that ego produced. The left trail face," she said. "That's the approach trail." Ethan looked at her. "That's the trail we came up on," she said. "Yes," he said. The word hit the group like a physical thing. He watched it land in each face, Todd's going blank, Marcus's tightening, Derek's working through denial, and arriving somewhere past it with visible effort. Sandra's going very still. Claire, from her position against the back wall, simply closed her eyes for 3 seconds and then opened them again. "Is it passable?" Claire asked. Her voice was level. "I don't know yet," Ethan said. "I'll assess at first light. What's your estimate?" He looked at her steadily. "Heavy debris fall on a saturated trail at night after significant precipitation. My estimate is significant obstruction. But we don't know," Derek said. The hope in his voice was not convincing, even to himself. "We don't know," Ethan confirmed. "Which is why we wait for light." Midnight passed without anyone noting it. At 12:40 in the morning, Ethan moved to the edge of the formation and took out his headlamp. He aimed it down the slope for 30 seconds. The beam reached 60, maybe 70 feet before the mist absorbed it. He could see the upper section of the approach trail. He could also see the debris field. It was not a complete blockage, but it was substantial, large rock sections and consolidated earth that would require climbing over rather than walking around. In wet conditions, with a group that included one person still recovering from earlier physical compromise, and another whose attitude toward physical challenge was going to be the limiting factor on any technical traverse. He turned the headlamp off. He went back inside and said nothing about what he'd seen. Not because he was hiding information, but because telling the group at 12:40 in the morning what he'd seen produced nothing useful except a sleepless night of anxiety. He'd tell them at first light, when the information had context and action attached to it. He sat back down, closed his eyes, did not sleep. At 4:22 in the morning, Claire was suddenly beside him. He hadn't heard her move. She'd gotten better at moving quietly over the past 12 hours, in the unconscious way that people adapted to environments that punished noise and celebrated stillness. "You're not sleeping," she said quietly. "No. You haven't slept at all, no." She sat down next to him, not the careful executive distance from earlier. Just sat down, close, the way a person sits next to someone they've been in something with, when the formal structure of the relationship has been stripped away by weather and time and shared fear. "How do you do this?" she said. Not the question from earlier about managing fear. A different question. One he could feel the weight of before she finished asking it. "Do what?" "Stay," she said. "Just stay. Just keep going. When you don't know if the trail's open. When the radio's dead. When there's nothing, no communication, no extraction confirmed, no guarantee that any of this works out. How do you just stay?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing he'd been deciding whether to say since 5 o'clock the previous afternoon. "I used to run a high-altitude search and rescue unit," he said. She turned to look at him. "Field commander. Southern Rockies. 8 years. He paused. "We got called into situations that most experienced SAR teams would decline on paper. Vertical face extractions in zero visibility. Post-avalanche burials at 48 hours. Aircraft down in terrain. Rated unpassable under the conditions we were working in." She was very still. "You were doing this professionally," she said. "At a level significantly beyond what I do now." "Yes. Why did you stop?" He was quiet. The rain outside moved through another shift in intensity, lighter for a moment. Almost nothing, then settling back to its steady commitment. "I had a daughter," he said. She didn't say anything. Lily was 7. I'd missed most of the first 3 years of her life on assignments. By the time I came back, really came back, between assignment back, doesn't count, she was 3. And then I'd go again, and she'd be 4. And I'd come back. And then 5. And 6. He stopped. At 7, she stood in the doorway of her mother's apartment and looked at me the way kids look at someone they're not sure whether to trust yet. And I was her father. And she wasn't sure whether to trust me. Claire's voice was careful. "That's why you left." "That's why I quit," he said. "Not left. Quit. There's a difference. Leaving suggests you might go back. Did you ever want to?" He considered this honestly. "There are mornings," he said. "The skill is still there. The training is still there. I still see things that other people miss in wilderness environments, and I still know what to do about them. On some level that doesn't turn off just because you decided you don't want it defining you anymore." He looked at his hands. "But then I drive Lily to school, or she calls me when she's had a bad day, or she makes pasta and tells me about it, and the other thing gets quieter." He said it without sentimentality, just as a fact, the way all his important statements were facts. Claire looked at him for a long time. "This assignment was supposed to be simple," she said. "Yes," he said. "I put you in a situation you hadn't prepared for." "I'm always prepared," he said. "I haven't stopped preparing. I've just been preparing for smaller situations." He looked toward the mouth of the formation. "This isn't small, no," she said. "But we're going to be all right," he said. And then, carefully, deliberately, "I know how to do this. Even now. Even after everything. I still know how to do this." She held his gaze in the dark for a moment. "I believe you," she said. And something in the way she said it, not the executive assessing a contractor, not the CEO evaluating a resource, just a person who had been in the dark for a long time and had decided that the person next to her knew the way out, something in that settled into the space between them and stayed. At 5:15 in the morning, Ethan woke the group. Not gently, purposefully. "Everyone up," he said. "We move at first light. Get food in you now. Anything you're carrying. All of it." The group came awake with the particular alertness of people who hadn't actually been fully asleep, the surface kind of awareness that keeps the body technically resting while the mind stays just below waking. Listening. Todd sat up immediately.
"The trail?"
"We're going to assess," Ethan said. "The slope that gave way last night." "I know," Ethan said. "Eat first." Assessment after, Ethan. Marcus from his position against the far wall. His voice had the careful evenness of a man who had been running numbers in his head all night and had arrived at an answer he didn't like. "If the approach trail is blocked." "There's another route," Ethan said. The group went very quiet. "What route?" Derek asked. Ethan had been thinking about this since before midnight. He'd known about the route since he'd done his initial terrain assessment 3 weeks ago, before accepting the contract. It was in his report, the 14-page report that had been summarized as overly cautious and filed away unread. In that report on page 9, he had identified an alternate egress route through the northern drainage toward a ranger service road used for fire season access. The road connected to a ranger station, approximately 4 miles out. 4 miles in current conditions with this group, descending wet terrain on no sleep after a night at altitude. It was survivable. He was certain of it. Difficult, but survivable. "There's an alternate egress through the northern drainage," he said. "It brings us to an old ranger access road. The road leads to a ranger station with radio communication and vehicle access." "How far?" Sandra asked. "Approximately 4 miles. Todd did the math out loud. 4 miles, in this weather, down." "Yes. With Claire I'll walk it," Claire said, from her position against the wall. Her voice was firm in a way that carried weight, not the executive firmness of yesterday, but something that had been tested and confirmed overnight. "Don't make decisions about me without me." Todd looked at her. "Claire, you were on the ground yesterday." "And I'm not on the ground now," she said. "I ate, I rested, I'll walk it." She looked at Ethan. "We go." At 6:03 in the morning, Ethan stood at the mouth of the formation and made his final assessment of the approach trail. The debris field was exactly what his headlamp beam had suggested in the dark. Heavy enough that attempting it with this group, in wet conditions, with no technical climbing equipment, and one member still managing residual effects of altitude sickness, was not a reasonable option. The northern drainage route was the call. Had been the call since midnight. This was just confirmation. He turned around. "Northern drainage," he said. "We move now. Same protocol as yesterday. Nobody more than 20 feet forward. Nobody more than 20 feet back. We're going down, which means different muscle groups, different fatigue pattern. Let me know immediately if your legs start to go. Do not push through it quietly. Tell me." He looked at each person individually. They all nodded. He looked at Derek. "No," Derek said. It came out simply and without the smooth, professional coding. Just a man who had understood, over the course of a night in the dark, that the thing he was very good at corporate maneuvering, information management, influence had exactly zero value in this particular environment. "Whatever you say, Ethan." "Good," Ethan said. He picked up his pack. "Let's go home," he said. The descent through the northern drainage was not the worst terrain Ethan had ever managed. But, for this group, in these conditions, it demanded everything they had, and then some. The first 40 minutes were controlled. The route was angled but manageable, and the group found a rhythm that preserved energy, short steps, careful placement, no rushing. Ethan ran constant position checks, calling back to confirm spacing every 10 minutes, listening for the breathing patterns that indicated someone approaching their limit. At 6:50 in the morning, Todd's left knee gave him the first warning sign, a slight hitch in his stride that Ethan caught from 3 people ahead. He dropped back without breaking the overall pace. "Knee?" he said quietly, moving alongside Todd. "Tightening," Todd said through his teeth. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Ethan said. "Downhill knee pain at this stage means your quads are fatiguing and transferring load to the joint. We adjust your technique." He repositioned Todd's weight slightly, explained the correct posture for descent in 2 sentences, waited until he saw Todd apply it. The hitch smoothed out. "Better?" Ethan said. Better, Todd admitted. Tell me when it comes back. You'll see it before I say it. Probably, Ethan said, and kept moving. At 7:18 in the morning, Ethan's satellite phone vibrated. He pulled it out. 1 bar. The 14% battery from last night had dropped to 6. He had minutes, maybe. He called the staging coordinator's number. 2 rings. Cole, that you? We've been. Northern Drainage. Heading toward the fire service road and ranger station. Ethan said immediately. 6 people. 1 member had altitude sickness episode yesterday. Recovered. Group intact. No critical injuries. Approach trail blocked by slope movement overnight. We're moving. ETA 3 hours. Copy that. Search protocol activated at 6 this morning when you didn't check in. I've got 2 teams staged at. The signal dropped. 6%. He turned the phone off. The teams knew the route now. That was enough. At 8:45 in the morning, the mountain produced its second decision. They heard it before they felt it, a low, directional rumble from somewhere above the left slope face, lasting longer than the one the night before, carrying more mass in the sound. It was coming from high enough that Ethan had 2 or 3 seconds to assess and react. He stopped walking. Stop, he said, full voice. No hesitation. Everyone stopped. He listened. The rumble built. Not toward them parallel. Moving across the face of the lower slope ahead, tracking the natural drainage channel about 60 yards below their current position. Back against the slope face now, he said. Everybody. Right side. Face the rock. Don't move, they moved. People who yesterday might have debated or asked questions moved without a single word, pressing themselves against the right side rock face, the way Ethan directed. The sound crested. Then a wall of compressed air and fine snow spray washed across the drainage below them, with a force that Ethan felt against his back from 60 yards. The debris field ran for 8 seconds. He counted. 8 seconds of mass, moving through the drainage at a velocity that would have taken everyone in the group off their feet and down the slope. Then it settled. Silence. Nobody spoke for 4 seconds. Then Todd said very quietly, "Was that an avalanche?" "Yes," Ethan said. Another silence. "And it missed us," Marcus said. "Yes." "How did you know to stop?" "The sound," Ethan said. "You learned the sound." He moved to the edge and looked down at the drainage. The debris field was wide, and substantial packed snow, mixed with debris from the slope face, pushed through the drainage channel and spread across the lower trail section they had been heading for. Nick 1. He assessed it. It was passable. Not easily, not cleanly, but passable. The debris had not fully blocked the drainage. There were sections where the pack was lower, and the path through was workable. "Forward," he said. "Single file. Stay tight. We cross the debris field in 2 sections. I go first, identify the path. You follow my exact footsteps. Step where I step. Exactly where you step," Marcus said. "As close as you can manage," Ethan said. "The debris field is unstable at the edges. The center track will be more consolidated." He moved to the edge of the field and began picking his way across, testing each step before committing his weight, building the track, marking it in his mind so he could guide the others through verbally. It took 9 minutes to cross the debris field. Every one of those 9 minutes was the kind of concentrated, deliberate expenditure of attention that left a person mentally exhausted in a way that physical exertion alone couldn't produce. He tracked his own footing and simultaneously called guidance back to each group member in turn, adjusting his instructions based on their size, their stride length, their level of fatigue, and the degree to which their nervous system was cooperating with their legs. Sandra crossed clean. Marcus stumbled once on a buried rock edge and recovered before Ethan had to move. Todd made it through on sheer focused determination, the earlier knee problem temporarily suppressed by adrenaline. Derek surprised him crossed with his eyes down, following the track precisely. Not speaking then Claire. She was doing well. 4 steps in. 6. She found the rhythm of it, and her body remembered the careful deliberate movement from the descent she'd been getting better at listening to herself in the past 12 hours. And it showed. At step 9, the debris beneath her right foot shifted. Not a collapse. A single instability, a section of consolidated snowpack over an air pocket that hadn't been visible and hadn't registered under his weight because he was heavier and had struck it at a slightly different angle. Under her foot at her body weight, it gave. Her leg went through to mid-calf. She went forward, hard, and her right hand went out to catch herself. She caught the edge of a large debris chunk, caught it, held for 1 second, and then the chunk rotated, and she went down sideways. "Claire," Ethan said. He was already moving before he'd said her name. He'd covered half the distance between them when the secondary debris shifted the large section to her left that had been resting at a precarious angle since the avalanche settled it there. It moved with a grinding sound and came down across her lower body. Not a crushing weight. Not the kind of event that snapped bones and ended things. But substantial. She was pinned, both legs, from the knee down, under a debris section that Ethan estimated at between 200 and 250 pounds of compacted material. She was not injured. She was trapped. "Don't move," Ethan said, reaching her. He had his hands on the debris section, immediately, assessing it, the shape, the stability, the weight distribution, which direction he could move it without triggering further shift from the sections above it. "I'm not moving," she said. Her voice was remarkably controlled. The fear was in it, but it wasn't driving. "What do you need to do?" "I need to move this section laterally," he said. "When it comes off your legs, roll right immediately. Don't stand. Don't push up. Just roll right and get clear." "Okay," she said. "Are you ready?" Yes. Behind him, the group had frozen at the far edge of the debris field, where he'd told them to stop and wait. Todd's voice came across the debris. "Ethan, we can stay there," Ethan said. "Do not come into this field. If this section goes further, more people in here makes it worse." He assessed the debris section one more time. Then he gripped it. He used his legs first, the way you move heavy weight when you know what you're doing. Driving from the hips and thighs, not pulling with the arms and back. The section moved 4 inches. 6. The material shifted above it, and his hands screamed at him, and he kept going. 10 inches. Claire was pulling her legs free as the gap opened, rolling right the way he'd told her, moving with controlled urgency. At 12 inches of movement, the debris above the section began to slide. Ethan pushed the section, the final required distance, with everything he had left. The section went. Cleared Claire's legs completely. She was rolling. She was clear. She was moving away from the impact zone. The debris above came down on his left side. It caught his left shoulder. The impact drove him sideways and down. And the pain that arrived was the specific, high-intensity, blinding pain of a joint impacted at an angle it was not designed to absorb, with a force that it had never been invited to manage. He felt the shoulder give, not fully, not a complete structural failure, but enough. The rotator cuff, almost certainly. The labrum, possibly. He went to one knee. He had approximately 3 seconds before the adrenaline wore off, and the pain took over his functional capacity. He used all 3 of them. He pushed himself upright. He stepped off the debris field. He walked to the clear ground on the far side, with Claire, and he kept his left arm pressed against his side, and his face arranged in an expression that communicated nothing about what his shoulder was doing to him. He looked at Claire. She was sitting on solid ground, both hands on her knees, breathing hard, visually checking her legs. No blood, no structural damage visible, movement in both ankles and knees. She was bruised. She'd be significantly sore by afternoon. She was fundamentally intact. She looked up at him. "Are you?" She stopped. Something in his face or his posture told her. "You're hurt." "I'm functional," he said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It's not. Your shoulder. It took a hit. We'll manage it." Ethan, Claire. His voice was quiet. The same voice he'd been using for 24 hours across every situation this mount had generated. "I know what I'm doing. The shoulder is significant, but it is not incapacitating. I need it to be good for another 2 to 2.5 miles. It will be good for another 2 to 2.5 miles. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. "What can I do?" she said. It was the same question from the formation the afternoon before, but this time it came from a different place. Not the strategic executive managing her position in a crisis. Just a person asking the person next to her what they needed. "Stay claw behind." "I won't," she said. He turned to the rest of the group, who had crossed the debris field and gathered in a tight cluster 10 feet away. faces showing the accumulated toll of everything the past 18 hours had produced: fear and cold and exhaustion, and the specific, raw quality of people who have been in genuine danger and have not fully processed it yet. "Everyone count off," Ethan said. They did, 6 voices. "All present." "Good," he said. "We move." "Your Todd started." "Moves with me," Ethan said. "Let's go." He walked, and one by one they followed. Because there was nothing else to do. And because in the particular way that trust gets built, in conditions where trust is the only currency that matters, they had learned, over the past 18 hours, that when Ethan Cole said they were moving, moving was the thing that was going to get them home. The next 90 minutes were the hardest of Ethan's physical life in the past 5 years. Not the most technically demanding. He'd managed more complex extractions with worse injuries, under worse conditions during his rescue years. But those years were a decade behind him, and the body he was asking to carry 6 people through a mountain descent now was 42 years old, had been awake for more than 24 hours, had not eaten adequately in the same period, and was managing a shoulder impact that sent white-hot signals up his neck every time the left arm moved from the position he'd locked it into. He dealt with it the way he dealt with everything out here. Compartmentalized it, filed it away, let it run in the background, kept the part of him that needed to function running in the foreground. At 9:17 in the morning, Marcus saw it first. "There," he said. Is that a structure?" Ethan looked. 200 yards ahead, through the thinning mist, the angular geometry of a building resolved against the natural curves of the terrain. Low profile, utilitarian construction, a vehicle access road running away from it in the direction of the valley below. The ranger station. Nobody shouted. Nobody ran. The group was too far past the capacity for theatrical relief to produce it. What happened instead was quieter and more honest, a collective exhale, like a single organism releasing a breath it had been holding since 11:58 the night before. Sandra made a sound that might have been a laugh. Todd closed his eyes for 4 seconds. Derek sat down on the ground where he was standing and didn't get up for a full minute. When he finally did, there was nothing corporate about his face. Nothing smooth. Just a man who was very, very tired and very, very grateful. Ethan kept walking. At the station door, he tried the handle with his right hand. It opened. Inside on the wall, a radio unit sat in its mount. A government-issue emergency communication device. Standard ranger station equipment. He crossed to it without sitting down. Keyed the power, waited for the tone. It powered up clean. He picked up the handset. "This is Wilderness Safety Contractor Ethan Cole," he said. 6 civilians, 1 injured, requesting extraction at the North Fire Road Ranger Station. He gave the grid coordinates from memory. "Copy, a 2-second delay." "Copy, Mr. Cole, we have your coordinates. Search teams are staged approximately 40 minutes out. Medical helicopter is available. Confirm if needed." He looked back at the group. Claire had lowered herself onto a bench along the wall. She was holding her left knee, which had swollen during the descent. She needed imaging. She needed rest. She needed things that a ranger station in the mountains couldn't provide, and a hospital could. "Confirm medical helicopter," he said into the radio. "Confirmed. ETA 45 minutes. He set down the handset. He stood with his right hand on the radio table and his left arm against his side, and his eyes closed for exactly 5 seconds. 5 seconds of not managing anything. Then he opened his eyes and turned around. 45 minutes, he said. "Everyone inside. Use what's in the emergency cabinet: blankets, rations, water. First aid kit is in the red box on the right wall." He looked at Sandra. "Can you manage basic first aid for Claire's knee while I work the radio?" "Yes," Sandra said. "Already moving." He nodded. He looked at the group, all of them, one at a time, the way he'd been cataloging them since they'd left the staging area the morning before. Todd, sitting against the wall, with his head back and his eyes up at the ceiling, the fear finally draining out of his face. Marcus, with both hands around a water bottle from the emergency cabinet, drinking like someone who had been reminded that water was not guaranteed. Derek, sitting apart from the others with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, not composing himself, not managing his presentation, just sitting with whatever he was feeling without putting anything over it. And Claire, she was watching Ethan from the bench, had been watching him since they walked through the door. Sandra was carefully examining her knee, and Claire was not looking at her knee. She was looking at the man who had spent the past 21 hours doing the one job that actually mattered, with a broken radio, in a storm, on no sleep, with a group of people who had not listened to him, in a mountain he hadn't wanted to be on, with a shoulder that was probably going to need surgery, for a 14-year-old girl he'd promised to come home to. Ethan finally sat down, not in a chair, the floor, with his back against the wall and his right arm resting on his right knee and his left arm still pressed against his side. He let his head go back against the wall, and he looked at the ceiling of the ranger station and breathed. Just breathed. For the first time in 21 hours. That was all he needed to do. Ethan, Claire said. He didn't move his head. Yeah. Thank you, she said. He was quiet for a moment. You're welcome, he said. And that was all either of them said for the next 7 minutes. The wind was still moving outside. The mist was still coming down. Somewhere above them, on a trail that would be passable again, in 2 days when the debris cleared, the mountain was already returning to itself, patient, indifferent, enormous, unchanged by what had happened on its face overnight. It had not been trying to kill them. It had simply been what it was, which, Ethan had always believed, was the most important thing to understand about wild places. They didn't want anything from you. They just were. And whether you survived them depended entirely on whether you were willing to understand them on their own terms instead of yours. At 10:02 in the morning, they heard the helicopter. Todd stood up first, then Marcus. Then everyone was moving toward the door, and the sound of the rotors came through it, clean and clear, and 32 feet above the ranger station, clearing the aircraft leveled into its approach. And Ethan Cole sat on the floor of the station, with his back against the wall, and his eyes closed, and his left shoulder burning, and thought about pasta. The helicopter lifted at 10:17 in the morning. Claire was the first one aboard. The flight medic, a young woman with efficient hands and a practiced calm that reminded Claire uncomfortably of Ethan, had assessed the knee, wrapped it, confirmed no structural fracture, and guided her up the steps with the kind of directional kindness that brooked no debate. Claire sat in the seat she was put in and buckled the harness she was handed and looked out the open bay door at the clearing below the ranger station. She was looking for Ethan. She found him standing 40 feet from the station, to the right of the landing pad, watching the aircraft with his right hand in his jacket pocket, and his left arm still pressed against his side the way it had been since the debris field. He hadn't had it looked at yet. He'd redirected the medic to Todd's knee, to Marcus's hand laceration, to Derek's elevated pulse, to every person in the group, in sequence, before the medic had finally circled back and looked at Ethan's shoulder directly. Claire had watched that exchange from the station bench, watched Ethan deflect 3 times, watched the medic finally put her hands up in the universal gesture of a professional who understood they were being outmaneuvered and decided to let it go until they were in the air. Now Ethan was standing below the aircraft, and he was looking up at her through the open bay door, and the expression on his face was the same expression it had been for the past 21 hours, not closed. Not performing, just present, watching, making sure. The flight medic reached up to close the bay door. Claire raised her hand. Ethan nodded once. The door closed. She lost sight of him as the aircraft lifted and banked south, and she kept her eyes on the clearing until the ranger station became too small to see, and the mountain became the thing filling the window instead. And then even the mountain went behind cloud, and there was nothing but gray sky, and the mechanical rhythmic sound of the rotors doing their work. She leaned her head back against the seat. She thought, he's still down there. And she realized she didn't know why that bothered her as much as it did. The hospital in Denver was everything the mountain was not. Controlled, climate managed, lit with the flat institutional brightness that made everything look equally unreal. Claire moved through the admission process in a compression sleeve and a wheelchair she didn't want but accepted, because arguing would have wasted time she didn't have the energy for. The orthopedic physician confirmed a lateral meniscus contusion, significant soft tissue inflammation, no surgical requirement, 6 to 8 weeks of modified activity, and a follow-up in 2 weeks. She was released at 3:40 in the afternoon. Her assistant, a 28-year-old named Patrick, who had worked for her for 3 years and had learned to manage her schedule without requiring emotional management himself, was waiting with a car at the hospital entrance. He said nothing about the condition of her clothing, the bruise visible along her left jaw from the debris fall, or the compression wrap on her knee. He opened the door, confirmed her preferred route back to the hotel, and didn't ask questions that she hadn't invited. She had trained him well. In the car, she said, "Get me the incident report. The company's preliminary has already been." "Not the preliminary," she said. "The original. The one filed by the safety contractor. The full report." Patrick typed something into his tablet. 17 seconds of silence. "I'm showing a preliminary company report generated this morning," he said. "There's no safety contractor report in the system." She turned to look at him. "Run it again." He ran it again. Same result. "Pull Derek Harlan's emails from the past 3 weeks," she said. "Everything." Patrick looked at her. He had the specific expression of a man who understood that a request he'd been given was operating in a different register than the usual requests he was given, and who was intelligent enough to understand that the correct response was to do it rather than to ask why. "I'll have it within the hour," he said. She turned back to the window. The mountain was behind her now, 60 miles north, invisible and enormous and utterly indifferent to what she was feeling. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. At 4:52 in the afternoon, Patrick handed her his tablet. She read Derek Harlan's emails for 12 minutes without speaking. The car was parked outside the hotel because she hadn't moved to get out, and Patrick hadn't suggested it. The report was there. Not in the safety contractor file system, where it should have been, not in the shared project repository, not in the trail safety folder, not in any of the 5 locations where a 14-page document filed 3 weeks ago should have appeared in the normal course of business operations. It was in an email thread between Derek Harlan and a senior procurement manager named William Chase, dated 19 days ago, with a subject line that read, "FW, Coal Safety Assessment, recommend internal review before wider distribution." The body of the email, in Derek's voice, read as follows: "The coal assessment raises a number of concerns about trail infrastructure that, if distributed to the acquisition team, could generate questions from the board about timeline feasibility. Recommend we keep this internal until after the site visit is complete and the acquisition letter of intent is executed. At that point, we can address the maintenance items in the standard capital improvement process." The response from William Chase, sent 40 minutes later: "Agreed. I'll hold the distribution. Cole has been notified that his report is under review." Claire set the tablet on her knee. She sat with what she'd just read for exactly the time it took to understand it fully and honestly, not the version that minimized it, not the version that found the mitigating context, but the direct, unvarnished truth of it. Derek Harlan had received Ethan's report, had read it or had it read to him, had understood that it identified serious and specific equipment failures and infrastructure problems that would require corrective action before any responsible safety review could approve the site visit, and had decided deliberately and in writing to suppress it. Not because he doubted its accuracy, because acting on it would have delayed the deal. She picked up her phone and called Derek. He answered on the second ring. He was in the hospital, mild hypothermia and dehydration, responding well to treatment, expected to be discharged by morning. His voice on the phone was careful and hoarse and very quiet.
"The coal report," she said. "Silence, Derek."
The coal report. Claire, it was a judgment call. The property was. He documented broken emergency equipment, she said. He documented missing communication devices. He documented inadequate evacuation routes. He documented ignored maintenance requests. He did this 3 weeks ago. And you buried it. I didn't bury it. I held it for internal. You told William Chase to keep it from the acquisition team because distribution would slow the deal. Her voice stayed completely level. This was not anger. Anger was too imprecise an instrument for what she was holding right now. This was something colder and more deliberate. In writing. In your own words. In a company email. The silence this time lasted longer. The timeline. Derek started. 6 people were on that mountain, she said. 6 people. In conditions that your contractor had identified and documented as unsafe, in a report that you personally removed from circulation. A pause. Todd Reeves has a daughter, Derek. He told me that. She's 7 years old. Did you know that when you held the report? Claire, did you know? I know. Of course I didn't. No, she said. You didn't. Because you weren't thinking about people on that mountain. You were thinking about the acquisition timeline. And that is why we will be having a very different conversation in 48 hours when you're out of the hospital. She ended the call. She sat in the parked car for another 3 minutes. Then she said, Patrick, get me on the phone with legal. At 6:15 in the evening, from a hotel room in Denver with her leg elevated on 2 pillows and a room service coffee going cold on the bedside table, Claire Morgan called an emergency board meeting for 7 o'clock the following morning and informed her general counsel that she would be requesting an immediate and independent investigation into the circumstances surrounding the company's wilderness expedition. Her general counsel, a careful and precise woman named Helen Park, who had worked with Claire for 7 years and understood when a conversation required action, listened without interrupting, and then said, "This is going to be expensive." "Yes," Claire said. "And public." "Probably." "And the acquisition timeline." "The acquisition timeline is suspended," Claire said. "Immediately, as of tonight." A pause on Helen's end. The kind of pause that a person produces when they are rapidly recalculating a very large number of variables. "Claire, the seller's competing offer is their business," Claire said. "Not mine. Not tonight." Pause shorter. "Okay," Helen said. "I'll have the board notification out by 7. Investigation parameters by 9. Thank you," Claire said. She hung up. She looked at her phone. She had the staging coordinator's number from the expedition. She called it. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. She left a message asking for Ethan Cole's direct contact information. She put the phone down and closed her eyes and thought about the moment on the debris field when Ethan had moved toward her without hesitating, when everyone else in the group had been frozen at the edge and watching, when the rational calculus of personal risk should have told him to wait and assess and decide whether the action was viable. He hadn't calculated anything. He'd just moved. She thought about what that cost him. The shoulder. The pain he'd managed through 2 miles of mountain descent without letting it become anyone else's problem. The way he'd sat down on the floor of the ranger station when it was over, not in a chair, not at a table, on the floor with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, and the specific quality of a person who has something heavy and has set it down and is simply, for the first time, not carrying it. She was going to find him. She fell asleep with the room service coffee still on the table and her phone in her hand, and she slept for 11 hours without waking. The board meeting at 7 the following morning lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Claire had presented the incident in its full, unvarnished sequence: the Cole report, Derek's email chain, the equipment failures, the expedition, the overnight shelter, the avalanche, the debris field, the shoulder injury, all of it. She had not managed the narrative. She had not applied any of the instincts that 20 years of executive communication had built into her: the framing, the mitigation, the strategic sequencing of information to produce the least damaging interpretation. She had simply told them what happened, in order, with documentation. The board had gone very quiet by the end. The chairman, a 71-year-old man named Robert Ames, who had served on 5 boards in his career and had a particular talent for identifying the exact moment when a situation required decisive action instead of deliberation, had looked at Claire across the conference table for a long moment after she finished. "You're recommending we self-report," he said. "I'm recommending we get ahead of it," she said. "Yes, independent investigation. Yes, external. Not managed by anyone currently employed by this company. That includes you. That includes me," she said. Ames had looked at her for another moment. "You're aware that this is going to cost us the acquisition. I'm aware that 6 people went up a mountain on broken equipment because someone inside this organization decided a deal was worth more than their safety," she said. "And one of them came home with a damaged shoulder because he went back for me when the mountain fell on us. I'm not interested in protecting the acquisition. Ames had looked around the table. The vote was 9-2 in favor of the independent investigation. It took 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, Claire healed her knee and attended every session of the investigation that she was permitted to attend and answered every question put to her by the external review team without qualification or legal hedging, which her general counsel found professionally agonizing and Claire found completely necessary. What the investigation produced, in its final 47-page report, was not surprising to anyone who had been paying attention. It documented a pattern of deferred safety maintenance across multiple wilderness properties managed by the company, not systematic negligence, but the specific kind of institutional drift that happens when the people responsible for safety decisions are the same people responsible for deal timelines, and when those two priorities were allowed to compete without independent oversight. Ethan's report had not been the only contractor safety assessment suppressed in the past 18 months. It had been the third. That finding was the one that landed heaviest in the room where Claire sat with the investigation team on day 17 and heard it read aloud from a document prepared by people who had no interest in minimizing it. The third, which meant 2 other people, in 2 other projects, had filed safety assessments that had been held or buried or characterized as overly cautious and filed in internal review folders where they would age quietly and harmlessly until the deal closed and the maintenance items became someone else's routine capital expenditure. She thought about the word Ethan had used on Derek's first day. Manageable, said flatly, without expression. The one word that contained, compressed inside it, everything he understood about the gap between what that word cost the people who used it and what it cost the people who lived with its consequences. William Chase resigned on day 19. He provided full cooperation to the investigation in exchange for a separation agreement that his attorney negotiated without drama. He did not fight it. 3 other senior employees followed in the next 4 days, not forced out. Not terminated for cause, but gone in the way that people go when the institutional architecture they operated within has been examined closely enough that operating in it no longer feels sustainable. Derek Harlan was different. Derek fought it. He hired 2 lawyers and a crisis communications firm and produced a 14-page rebuttal to the investigation's preliminary findings that argued, with considerable technical precision, that he had not suppressed the report. He had initiated an internal review process consistent with standard corporate risk management protocols, and the fact that the site visit had proceeded before that review concluded was the result of timeline pressure from the board rather than his individual decision-making. His lawyers were right that the document was technically accurate. They were also right that it would not save him. On day 24, Claire called Derek directly. Not through lawyers, not through his communications firm. Directly, he answered on the 3rd ring. She could hear in the way he said her name that he'd been expecting this call and had been rehearsing for it. Derek, she said, I've read the rebuttal. Then I know you're right that the board was pushing timeline, she said. I know I was part of that pressure. And I've said so, on the record, to the investigation team. My own role in this is documented. A pause. What I want you to understand, she said, is that I'm not doing this to protect myself. I'm doing this because a man I hired went back into a moving debris field to pull me out of it, and he came home with a damaged shoulder and his name in 1 paragraph of an incident report that called him a local safety contractor. And somewhere in this process, his work, the work he did 3 weeks before we set foot on that mountain, was looked at by people who worked for me and described as hedging. Silence? That man was not hedging, she said. He was right about every single thing he wrote, and everybody on this building's upper floors already knew he was right, and made a decision anyway, and called it a risk management process. Derek was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had something in it that was different from the smooth corporate register he'd operated in for every moment of the mountain expedition and every subsequent phone call. Something that sounded like hadn't been through the communications firm filter. I knew the report was accurate, he said. From day 1. I know, Claire said. I told myself the maintenance could be addressed after the acquisition. that the risk was genuinely manageable, that we had professional safety support on site. You had Ethan Cole, she said, which turned out to be the only reason we're all still here. But that's not a risk management strategy. That's luck. Another long silence. What do you want from me? Derek said. Full cooperation, she said. Testimony. Documentation. Everything you have. And if I do? Then you leave this with your professional reputation intact enough to rebuild, she said, which is better than the alternative. He agreed. He cooperated. He resigned the day after his testimony was concluded and moved to Oregon with his wife, who had, by all accounts Claire's network could access, been telling him for years that the pace he was keeping was going to cost him something he couldn't get back. She hoped he listened to her now. On day 29 of the investigation, Claire's assistant, Patrick, came into her office at 9:40 in the morning with his tablet turned toward her, his expression carrying the specific quality of someone who has found something they weren't expecting. The incident report, he said. The final company version, published this morning. She took the tablet and read it. The report described the expedition in careful, neutral language, the weather event, the shelter situation, the alternate egress route, the evacuation. It was accurate in its facts. It attributed the successful outcome to the group's preparation and the responsiveness of search and rescue protocols. Ethan's name appeared once in a subordinate clause, described as a local safety contractor who provided field guidance during the incident. She set the tablet down. Field guidance, she said. That's what it says, Patrick confirmed. She looked at the surface of her desk for a moment. Pull the original submission from the communications team, she said. I want to know who drafted this version. And I want to know what the original draft said. Patrick had the original draft within 40 minutes. She read it. The original draft, prepared by someone on the communications team who had apparently been working from actual interview notes, described Ethan Cole's role with considerably more precision. It documented the original safety assessment, the formal recommendation to cancel the upper section, and the field decisions that had, in the investigation team's language, materially affected the group's survival outcome. It named him not as a local contractor, but as the expedition's primary safety decision-maker. Someone had changed the document before publication. Someone had reduced him to one subordinate clause. She picked up her phone and called the head of communications directly. The call lasted 6 minutes. By the end of it, she had the name of the executive who had reviewed and edited the draft before publication and had made the specific choice to remove the context around Ethan's role. He was still employed. He would not be employed by end of business. She hung up. She sat for a moment with the knowledge of what had happened, not the weather, not the physical danger, not even Derek's email chain, but this, the quiet, bureaucratic erasure of a man who had done the most important work anyone on that mountain had done. Because someone in a comfortable office had looked at his professional title, looked at the optics, and decided that making a contractor the hero of an incident report was not useful to the company's public narrative. They hadn't decided he was unimportant because they knew him. They'd decided it because they didn't. Which was, she thought, exactly the problem. She called the staging coordinator for the third time. This time he answered. Mr. Cole's contract was canceled, the coordinator said. Standard post-incident protocol when a project is suspended. The company, I know why it was canceled, she said. I need his contact information. I have a cell number on file, but is it current? I don't know, he said. He used it as a contact for the contract. Whether he still, give it to me, he gave it to her. She called it immediately. It rang 4 times. Then a recorded message. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She put the phone down. She sat in her office on the 42nd floor of a building in Denver, with a knee that was still 3 weeks from fully healed, and a company that was in the middle of the largest internal restructuring it had undertaken in a decade. And she understood for the first time, since coming off the mountain, that finding Ethan Cole was not going to be as simple as making a phone call. She started over. She went to the original contract documentation. The address on file was a post office box in Hargrove, Colorado. She called the town's general information line, the kind of small town listing that larger cities had stopped maintaining years ago. The woman who answered knew the name immediately, the way people in small towns know names, which was without effort and with the background assumption that of course you know. Ethan Cole. He does wilderness safety. Lives up off Miller Road. A pause. Is something wrong? He's a good man. Nothing's wrong, Claire said. Thank you. She did not call the Miller Road address. She wasn't sure why. Something about the phone felt insufficient for what she needed to say. She wrote the address on a notepad, tore it off, put it in her desk drawer, and let 3 weeks pass before she did anything with it. Those 3 weeks were not idle. She restructured the company's safety oversight department, creating an independent division with its own reporting chain directly to the board, not through operations or development. She hired an external safety director with 30 years of wilderness and industrial safety experience, and gave her the authority to halt any project, at any stage, without executive override. She called it the override protocol, which she understood was both accurate and ironic. She restored the safety maintenance budget across all properties, not just the wilderness properties, and commissioned an independent infrastructure audit of every trail, access road, and facility the company operated. She contacted Todd Reeves privately and offered him a settlement that his lawyers had not asked for. Not because she was afraid of litigation. He hadn't filed any, but because he had a 7-year-old daughter and a knee that needed 3 months of physical therapy, and she was the CEO of the company that had put him in the situation that produced those facts. Todd called her back directly, without lawyers, 3 days after she made the offer. "I'm not suing you," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not assuming you are." "Then why?" "Because it's right," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's not usually how this works," he said. "No," she said. "It's usually not." He accepted the settlement. He sent her a handwritten note, too, weeks later, the kind of thing people did rarely and meaningfully, which was why it landed the way it did. The note said, "I want you to know that I don't hold what happened against you. I think you've handled this the way a person should handle it, and I don't say that lightly." She kept the note. Marcus Webb filed no claim and made no public statement. He returned to work 2 weeks after the incident, quieter than before, by every account she received, and requested a transfer from the development division to operations, which she approved without comment. Sandra Park remained, which Claire was glad about, because Sandra was the most competent person in her organization's legal department, and also because Sandra had been on a cold mountain in a rock formation in the dark, exactly the person she needed her to be: present, functional, and free of the need to make the situation about herself. On the morning of day 41, Claire walked into a board meeting and accepted, on the record and without mitigation, responsibility for the decisions that had led to the expedition and its outcome. She did not qualify it. She did not defer it to Derek's email chain, or William Chase's cooperation, or the culture of timeline pressure that the investigation had identified as a structural factor. She said, "I received information that required action, and I chose timeline over safety. I put people in a dangerous situation. I accept that." Robert Ames, sitting at the end of the table, watched her do it. When she finished, he said, "That's the hardest kind of leadership." "It should be the easiest," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "It should." On day 43, Claire opened her desk drawer and looked at the note with the Miller Road address. She thought about what she wanted to say to him. Had been thinking about it for 6 weeks. Had written 4 different versions in her head, one formal, one pragmatic, one that tried to be casual and came out wrong even in rehearsal, and one that was just the truth without structure, which was probably the right approach. She thought about the night on the mountain, the way he'd sat next to her in the dark and told her the truth about 3 people who hadn't made it home. The way he'd said every single day, not the performed grief of a man wanting to seem deep, but the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of a man who had integrated something very hard into the ordinary texture of his life. She thought about his voice on the satellite phone, talking to Lily. The way he'd said, "I'm going to be okay" instead of "I promise," and what the difference between those 2 things said about him. She thought about what she wanted to offer him, and what she thought he'd say to it. She picked up the phone and called Patrick. "I need to be in Hargrove, Colorado on Friday," she said. "I'll arrange." "I'm driving," she said. Just block the calendar from 9 in the morning. A brief pause from Patrick that meant he was noting the unusual nature of the request and filing it without comment. Done, he said. She put the phone down. She looked at the desk drawer. She thought about what he'd said. On the helicopter. Through the closed door, no. What he hadn't said. What he'd communicated with one nod. And then, with the decision to disappear into the trees while she was being lifted away, and with no goodbye and no explanation and no forwarding address, she understood it now, in the way she hadn't understood it when it happened. He hadn't disappeared because he was running from something. He'd disappeared because he was running towards something. Because she was safe. And that was the end of his obligation. And his daughter was 70 miles south, in a town where nobody needed him to be anything other than what he was, waiting for him to come home and tell her the pot was good. The acquisition, as Robert Ames had predicted, was lost. The sellers had moved to the competing offer the morning after Claire suspended the company's letter of intent. They had been courteous about it. The kind of courtesy that business professionals extend to each other in situations where everyone understands there was no alternative and nobody is required to say it directly. Claire had received the notification in her hotel in Denver and had looked at it for 30 seconds and then put her phone face down and gone to sleep. She did not think about it much after that. There would be other properties. There would be other acquisitions. There would be other timelines and other boards and other decisions that required balancings, speed against caution, and money, against something harder to quantify. She intended to balance them differently from now on. Not perfectly. She was realistic enough to know that the pressures that had built the culture, the investigation did not dissolve because someone at the top made a decision to change course. Cultures changed slowly, through repeated choices made under real pressure, and some of those choices would be wrong, and the wrongness would cost something, and what you did in response to the cost was where the character actually lived. But she intended to start. She had learned, on a mountain in September, that the most important person in any operation is not always the person with the biggest title. Sometimes it's the person everyone else has already decided to ignore. Sometimes it's the person who tells you the truth when the truth is inconvenient and then tightens the strap on their old backpack and goes in anyway when you don't listen. Sometimes the person who saves your life is the person your incident report describes as a local safety contractor. She had let that happen once. She did not intend to let it happen again. On Thursday evening, she sat at her desk and wrote a brief note, handwritten, not typed. She wrote it twice because the first version came out too formal and the second version came out closer to honest. She folded it and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket and did not read it again. She would bring it on Friday. She did not know if he would take it. She thought, based on everything she had come to understand about Ethan Cole in 43 days and one night on a mountain, that he probably wouldn't take what she was planning to offer. She also thought, based on those same 43 days, that she needed to ask anyway, because some things deserved to be said in person, and because the man who had gone back into a debris field for her had not done it because it was required, had not done it because it was protocol, had not done it because there was any professional calculation that made it the right choice. He had done it because he was the kind of man who did not leave people behind. The least she could do was show up. Friday morning, she got in the car at 8:45. The drive to Hargrove was 2 hours and 11 minutes on a clear September morning, 1 year and 11 days after the expedition. The road north from Denver was the kind of drive she usually spent on calls, on email review, on the continuous productive occupation that had defined her relationship with empty time for most of her adult life. She made no calls. She drove through the morning with the radio off and her hands at 10 and 2 and the mountains on her left, patient and enormous, wearing the first fall on the upper slopes in yellows and oranges that she noticed now in a way she would not have noticed a year ago. The mountain had done that too. It had taken things from her and left other things in their place. She arrived in Hargrove at 10:56 in the morning and found the school without difficulty. A small public school on a side street, 3 blocks from the town center. with a parking lot half full of pickup trucks and an administrative office that answered her knock with a woman in her 50s who had the easy authority of someone who had been running that front office for at least a decade and was not easily flustered. "I'm looking for Ethan Cole," Claire said. "I believe his daughter attends school here." The woman looked at her with the specific evaluating quality of a small-town administrator who had developed a finely calibrated sense for which strangers were benign and which needed managing. She looked at Claire's knee brace, her city jacket, her careful, unfussy presentation. "You a friend of his?" she asked. "I know him," Claire said. "Professionally." The woman considered this. "He picks Lily up most days around 3:15, she said. "He parks on the side lot. Blue pickup." "Thank you," Claire said. She was 4 hours early. She got coffee from a small place on the main street and sat in a booth by the window and did not check her email. She watched the town move through its ordinary morning: the post office, the hardware store, the 2 or 3 pickup trucks going about the specific, purposeful errands of people who lived where they needed to and liked it that way. She thought about what she was going to say. At 3:08 in the afternoon, she walked back to the school. The blue pickup was already there. She'd expected to arrive before him. She had not. He was standing beside the truck with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking toward the school's main entrance. He was wearing the same faded jacket, the same worn boots, the same backpack on the passenger seat, visible through the window. His left shoulder was lower than his right, by a fraction, not dramatically, not something a stranger would notice. Just present. The quiet physical residue of what the mountain had cost him. She walked toward him. He heard her footsteps on the parking lot surface and turned before she reached him. He looked at her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then he said, "You look better." "So do you," she said. "The shoulder?" "Functional," he said. "That's still not the same thing." "No," he said. "It's still not." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note. She held it out. He looked at it for a moment. Didn't take it yet. His eyes came back to her face. "How'd you find me?" he said. "Small towns answer questions," she said. "If you ask them right." One corner of his mouth moved. Almost. "What's in the note?" he said. "An offer," she said, "which I want you to hear before you say no." He looked at her steadily. "I'm going to say no," he said. "I know," she said. "Hear it anyway." He took the note. He unfolded the note. It was handwritten. That surprised him, though he wouldn't have been able to explain precisely why. He'd filed Claire Morgan in the category of people who communicated in typed language, clean, controlled, professionally managed words that arrived in documented form and left no ambiguity about intent. Handwriting was a different thing. Handwriting had pressure in it, speed and hesitation visible in the ink. She'd written this twice, he could tell. By the way, the second line started slightly lower than it should have. The way people restart when they've decided to stop managing how something sounds and just write what it is. He read it in 12 seconds. Then he read it again. The note said 3 things. It said that she had read his original safety assessment in full, including the 14 pages he had submitted 3 weeks before the expedition, and that every finding in that document had been verified and confirmed by the subsequent independent investigation. It said that she understood, completely, and without mitigation, that the failure to act on his report was the proximate cause of everything that had followed. And it said that she was offering him the position of chief safety officer of the company, with a salary she named in the final line, and complete authority over every wilderness project the company undertook. The salary was significant. More than that, the authority she described was real, not the performative authority of a title with no actual power behind it, but a genuine structural position with a direct board reporting line, which she also named in the note with the matter-of-fact specificity of someone who understood that the difference between authority that exists on paper and authority that exists in practice is the reporting chain. He folded the note. He looked at her. "No," he said. She didn't react. She had clearly been prepared for this. "You said you'd hear it first," she said. "I heard it," he said. "It's a real offer. The authority structure is genuine. The salary is fair." He handed the note back to her. "No. Tell me why," she said. She said it without the executive edge that had been present in her voice on the mountain. without the specific quality of a woman who asked questions, knowing she already had the counter-argument prepared. She just asked. So he answered. Because that job lives in Denver, he said. In an office on the 42nd floor of a building I've driven past. With meetings and board calls and quarterly reviews, and the specific kind of slow institutional pressure that builds up until the person doing the job starts making the same calculations that put us on. That mountain. He looked toward the school entrance. I left one version of that life because my daughter didn't recognize me. I'm not going back to a different version of it. I'm not asking you to move to Denver, Claire said. The job description isn't complete, she said. I wrote the offer in 3 lines on a notepad. I left room. He looked at her. She held his gaze, with the directness that he had come to understand was not aggression. It was just how she existed in a conversation, when she meant what she was saying. Then talk, he said. I want you to have the authority to stop any wilderness project you believe is unsafe, she said. Not recommend. Not flag for review. Stop fully and completely and without anyone being able to override it. That authority needs to live with a person whose judgment I trust, who isn't embedded in the financial pressure of a development timeline, and who has the practical experience to tell the difference between a real risk and a manageable inconvenience. She paused. You're the only person I've met in the past year who could do that job the way it needs to be done. There are other qualified people, he said. There are other credentialed people, she said. That's not the same thing. He almost said something. She kept going before he could. I'm also not asking you to come to Denver, she said. No office, no required schedule, no mandatory meetings. You review project safety assessments remotely. You conduct site visits on your own timeline. And you have full-stop authority communicated to every project team before they set foot in the field. You're a contractor, not an employee, which means your tax structure and your schedule and your daughter's school pickup are all yours. A pause. And if you tell me a project is unsafe, we stop the project. No vote, no executive override, it stops. The school bell rang behind him. He heard it without turning. How do I know, he said, that the next person sitting in Claire Morgan's chair in 5 years doesn't make the same call Derek Harlan made? You don't, she said immediately. Neither do I. What I can tell you is that the stop authority I'm describing isn't granted by my position. It's structural. It's in the company's governance documents, approved by the board, with a direct reporting line that doesn't run through operations or development. She looked at him steadily. I built it so that it survives me, not because I plan to leave. Because the point of building something right is that it holds even when the person who built it is gone. Behind him, the doors opened. The sound of 200 children hitting afternoon air arrived all at once, voices and movement, and the specific high-energy chaos of a school day releasing its pressure. He turned instinctively, the way he turned toward any significant change in environment, and scanned the crowd coming through the doors. He found her in 11 seconds. Lily was moving with the particular unhurried purposefulness of a teenager who knew exactly where she was going and was in no rush to perform urgency about it. She had her backpack on one shoulder, and her hair pulled back, and her head down over her phone. But she looked up before she reached the truck. Because she always looked up before she reached the truck. And when she saw him, she did the thing she'd been doing since she was 9. Which was not wave or call out, but simply redirect her path toward him in a way that communicated, without any drama, that she'd been planning to end up there the whole time. Then she saw Claire. She slowed, not stopped. Slowed. Her eyes went from her father to the woman standing across from him, and the calculation that moved through her expression was teenage and immediate and complete. Who is this? Why is she here? What does this mean? Hey, she said to Ethan. Then to Claire. Hi, Claire said. And then, without performing warmth or adjusting her register in the way adults sometimes did when suddenly confronted with a 14-year-old they hadn't been expecting. You must be Lily. Yeah, Lily said. She looked at her father. Work thing? Yeah, he said. Lily looked at Claire again. Something moved through her expression that was harder to read than the initial calculation. Something more careful, more patient, the look of a person who was reserving judgment in the specific way that people do when they've learned that the first version of a story is rarely the whole one. The mountain, Lily said to her father. Yes, he said. Okay, she said. She put her backpack in the truck bed without being asked. I'll get a snack from the gas station. She held out her hand toward Ethan without looking at him. He put a 5 in her palm. She walked away. Claire watched her go. She knows, Claire said. Not a question. She knows the version I was willing to tell a 14-year-old, he said. Which is most of it. What did you leave out? The shoulder, he said. The debris field, the part where the mountain fell on me. Claire looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of a woman who was doing the math on what it meant to leave those specific details out, and what kind of person calculated that particular omission. You didn't want her to worry, she said. I didn't want her to be afraid of the mountains, he said. She was just getting to like them. That sentence landed between them with the quiet weight of something that had been thought about for a year. He hadn't just managed information. He'd protected something, the specific, fragile thing that was his daughter's relationship with the wilderness that was also, in its way, his relationship with her. If she was afraid of the mountains because he had been hurt on one, that fear would sit between them every time he went out on an assignment, and he would feel it, and it would change things. He hadn't been willing to let it change things. Claire looked down at the note, still folded in her hand. There's something else I need to tell you, she said. He waited. The company's incident report, she said. The one published 41 days after the expedition. I didn't read it, he said. Your name is in it once, she said, in a subordinate clause. The report describes you as a local safety contractor who provided field guidance during the incident. He was quiet for a moment. Field guidance, he said. Yes. Something moved through his expression. Not anger, he was too controlled for what he was feeling to register as anger on the surface, but something that had weight to it. Something that had been sitting in a drawer for a year, the way that particular kind of knowledge does, when you already suspected the answer and receive confirmation without surprise and feel it anyway. Someone edited the original draft, Claire said. The original named your role accurately. Described the assessment, the recommendations, the field decisions. Someone reviewed it before publication and made the choice to reduce it. She looked at him directly. I found out who. He's no longer employed by the company. Ethan looked at her. Did you fire him for that? He said. I gave him the opportunity to resign for that, she said. He took it. He looked away toward the street where Lily had gone. A beat of silence. That's not why I disappeared, he said. If that's what you're thinking. I wasn't thinking that, she said. I didn't disappear because I was angry, he said. Or because I expected recognition. I left because the job was done, and I needed to get home. He paused. I didn't think about the report. I know, she said. That's partly why I'm here. He looked back at her. Because someone needed to acknowledge it, she said. Out loud. To you. Not in a document. Not in a corporate communication. Not through a lawyer. You submitted a safety assessment 3 weeks before that expedition that was accurate in every finding and specific in every recommendation. That assessment was received, summarized by someone who characterized it as standard contractor hedging, and deliberately withheld from the people who needed it. And then you came on that mountain anyway, and you told the truth when you got there, and nobody listened. And when the mountain decided to make its own decisions, you made yours. Her voice stayed level, but he could hear the effort that levelness was costing her. You made them without hesitating. For all 6 of us, including me. A pause. That deserves more than a subordinate clause. He was looking at her steadily. She held it. I'm not looking for an apology, he said. I know, she said. I'm not offering one. I'm offering accountability. There's a difference. He nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man who understood the distinction and respected it. The investigation, he said. What did it find? That your report was the 3rd contractor safety assessment to be suppressed in 18 months, she said. Not the 1st. The 3rd. He went very still. 2 other assessments, she said. 2 other contractors who documented problems that someone with a deal on the table decided was inconvenient. Both times, the maintenance items were scheduled as post-acquisition capital expenditure. Both times, the site visits proceeded. She paused. Nobody was hurt on those 2. The weather cooperated. The infrastructure held long enough. She looked at him. But you were right. and they were lucky, and the gap between right and lucky. 3 weeks later, 6 people spent a night in a rock formation in September. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Not shock. He didn't look shocked. He looked like a man receiving confirmation of something he had suspected from the moment he walked into a room and saw a corroded battery in a dead radio. That this was not a failure of individual judgment but something larger, something institutional, something that had been running quietly in the background of a well-funded operation for long enough that it had started to feel like policy. Derek Harlan, he said. He's gone, she said. Full cooperation with the investigation in exchange for a separation agreement. He's in Oregon, William Chase. Resigned on day 19, she said. 3 others followed. He was quiet. And the 2 contractors, he said. The ones from the earlier assessments. She'd known this question was coming. She'd been sitting with it for 41 days, because she hadn't had a clean answer until day 37, when her team had finally located both individuals through the original contract records. We contacted both of them, she said. Directly. Their assessments were removed from the internal review status they'd been assigned and entered into the project records where they belong. The findings were addressed in the Capital Improvement Program, and we offered both of them consulting contracts going forward, which they were free to accept or decline without any obligation. She paused. 1 accepted. 1 declined. Both of them said the same thing when I called them. What did they say? Ethan asked. They said they'd wondered if anyone ever actually read what they wrote, she said. That sentence sat in the October air between them, with the full weight of what it meant. 2 people who had done their jobs correctly, who had documented what was true and submitted it through proper channels, and done exactly what professionals in their position were supposed to do, and had spent however many months since wondering whether it mattered, whether the work mattered, whether telling the truth cost you something and produced nothing. Ethan understood that feeling in the specific way that you understand something you have lived. He had spent 1 night in a rock formation on a mountain, wondering exactly the same thing. The offer I'm making you, Claire said, is partly about what you can do going forward, and partly about what you should have been able to do before the expedition. If the stop authority you'd have under this arrangement had existed 3 weeks ago, you would have used it, and 6 people would have stayed home, and a deal would have been delayed, and nobody would have been in that formation at midnight listening to the mountain make up its mind. He didn't say anything. I can't give you back the shoulder, she said, or the night, or the 14 pages that sat in a review folder for 3 weeks. She met his eyes. But I can build something that makes it impossible to do that to the next person who tells the truth. He looked at her for a long time. In the distance, he could see Lily coming back from the gas station, bag of something in her hand, moving without hurry along the sidewalk. Still 40 seconds away. He had 40 seconds. The authority you're describing, he said. If I file an assessment and I say stop, and the project stops, and I'm wrong, the terrain was actually manageable. The equipment was actually functional. The risk was actually within acceptable parameters. What happens? Nothing, she said. Nothing, he repeated. You were wrong about a professional judgment, she said. That happens. You document the reasoning, the team reviews the assessment criteria, we adjust the protocols if adjustment is warranted. Nobody is penalized for a conservative call in a wilderness safety context. The entire structure is built on the principle that a false positive is a delayed project, and a false negative is someone's husband or father or daughter not coming home. He looked at the note in her hand. That's in the governance documents, he said. Verbatim, she said. Approved by the board, permanent. Lily was 20 seconds away. One condition, he said. Tell me, she said. The assessments I file are shared with every stakeholder in a project simultaneously, he said. Not filtered through an executive. Not held for internal review. Every contractor, every project manager, every board member involved in a project receives my safety assessment. At the same time, in the same form, without summary or characterization. The raw document, my words, unmediated. She looked at him. That's going to make some of those conversations very uncomfortable, she said. Good, he said. She almost smiled. Agreed, she said. And I work from here, he said. Hargrove. My truck, my schedule. I come to you when a site visit requires it. not the other way around. Agreed, she said. And if you get a new CEO who doesn't like the arrangement, it's in the governance documents, she said again. It doesn't move with my position. It's structural. Lily reached them. It was the woman he was protecting. She looked at Claire. She looked at her father. She'd caught enough of the energy of the conversation to understand that whatever had been happening in the parking lot was not yet finished, and she had the particular teenage capacity for reading a room that children of parents who worked in complex professions often developed early. "You staying for dinner?" she said to Claire, flat and direct. Not unfriendly, but not performing friendliness either. Just asking. Claire blinked. Clearly not the question she'd expected. "She has a drive back to Denver," Ethan said. "It's a 2-hour drive," Lily said, still looking at Claire. "We have pasta." Claire looked at Ethan. He looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who had been outmaneuvered by someone considerably younger than himself, and understood it completely. "She makes the good one," he said. "Not from a box." For the first time since she'd walked into the parking lot, Claire Morgan laughed. Not the controlled professional acknowledgement of something mildly amusing. An actual laugh, short, real, slightly surprised. The kind that arrives before the person has decided whether to allow it. "I have a 2-hour drive," Claire said. 2.5 with traffic, Lily said. "Then maybe just coffee," Claire said. Lily considered this. Then she turned and started walking toward the truck. "Dad makes terrible coffee," she said over her shoulder. "We'll go to the place on Main Street." Ethan looked at Claire. "She's not wrong," he said. About the coffee. They went to the place on Main Street. It was a small cafe with 4 tables and a counter that had been there since before either of them had any reason to know Hargrove. Colorado existed. The woman behind the counter knew Ethan's order without being asked and brought a menu to Claire without being asked either. The specific effortless hospitality of a town that received strangers in the particular way, of a place that had enough of its own identity to feel generous about it. Lily ate whatever she'd gotten from the gas station and then ordered a hot chocolate and proceeded to conduct what Ethan recognized, without commenting on it, as a methodical and surprisingly effective interview of Claire Morgan, not overtly, not aggressively, but in the way that teenagers, who have been paying attention their whole lives, ask questions that sound casual and aren't. She asked what Claire's company did. She asked how many people worked there. She asked whether Claire had kids. She asked how long the drive was back to Denver and whether Claire had driven it often and whether she lived in Denver or somewhere else. Claire answered everything directly and without adjustment, without performing connection or attempting to calibrate herself to the conversation. She answered the way she answered everything, which was as close to exactly as possible. And Lily received those answers with the same evaluating stillness she'd brought to the parking lot. At one point, while Ethan was refilling his coffee from the counter, Lily said to Claire, "He didn't tell me it was bad up there." Claire looked at her. "The mountain," Lily said. "He called me on the satellite phone, and he made it sound like it was just a delay. I could tell it wasn't just a delay." She looked at her hot chocolate. "He does that. He makes things smaller than they are. So I don't worry." "I know," Claire said carefully. "I looked it up," Lily said after. "The incident report. His name was in it once." She said it without accusation. She was stating a fact that she had been holding for a year and was now, for reasons that she was probably still processing, choosing to set down in front of this particular stranger. "I know that too," Claire said. "That's something I'm in the process of addressing." Lily looked at her. "The shoulder was bad," Lily said. "Wasn't it?" A pause. "Yes," Claire said. Lily nodded. "Once." The kind of nod that says "I thought so, and I needed to hear someone say it, and I'm not going to do anything dramatic about it now that I have." She went back to her hot chocolate. When Ethan came back to the table, and the woman he was protecting, neither of them had moved, and neither of them looked at him with anything other than the ordinary expressions of 2 people who had been having a conversation. He sat down. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Claire. He said nothing. At 4:47 in the afternoon, Claire stood at her car in the parking lot of the cafe, and Ethan stood 2 feet away, and Lily had already gotten in the truck and was texting someone with the practiced invisibility of a teenager who understood that some conversations needed air around them. "I'll think about the offer," he said. That's different from no, she said. Yes, he said, it is. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I owe you something I haven't said yet. You don't owe me. I'm not asking your permission, she said. I'm saying it. She looked at him directly. You saved my life on that mountain. Not in the general sense. Specifically, the debris field. You back for me when everyone else was standing at the edge of it and waiting. You knew what it was going to cost you before you did it. He started to say something. You knew, she said. I could see it. There was a moment before you moved, just a moment where you assessed it completely. And you went anyway. She held his gaze. You saved my life. And your name ended up in one sentence, in a report that described you as a contractor. And I need you to know that I know what that gap is. And I know what it cost you. And I am sorry. He was quiet. He did not say it was fine, or that it didn't matter, or offer any of the comfortable deflections that a person reaches for when the weight of something real is placed in front of them. He just received it. The way he received everything fully, without performing a reaction, in the specific way of a man who had learned that the most honest thing you could do with a real statement was to let it be real. Thank you, he said, for coming here to say it. Thank you for answering, she said. She opened the car door. Ethan, he said. She turned. The independent contractor position. The governance structure you described. If that's built the way you're saying it is. He paused. Send me the documents. She looked at him. I'll read them, he said. She nodded. She got in the car. She drove south toward Denver, with the mountains on her right, and the October afternoon, doing what October afternoons do in Colorado, cutting the light in half and making everything look like a memory. She didn't make calls. She drove. She thought about Lily, asking whether Claire was staying for dinner. She thought about what it meant that a 14-year-old girl had sat across from the CEO of the company that had put her father in a debris field and asked her a direct question without flinching and waited for a direct answer. What kind of childhood produced that? What kind of father? She thought she was beginning to understand. He called her 11 days later. Not an email. Not a text through Patrick. He called her direct line, which she had given him in the parking lot 3 years ago on the mountain, which she still had in her phone under the name. Cole, no first name, no title, just the single clean word that she'd typed in at the staging area when she first logged the contractor contact. She answered on the second ring. I read the documents, he said. And she said, the stop authority is real, he said. The reporting structure is legitimate. The governance language holds what you said it would hold. Yes, she said. The simultaneous distribution clause is in there. Exactly as you specified, she said. A pause. I'll take the contract, he said. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. On one additional condition, he said. She had been expecting this. Name it, she said. The 2 contractors from the previous assessments, he said. The ones you contacted. The one who declined the consulting contract. What about him? I want his original safety assessment entered into the permanent project record, with a formal notation that its findings were valid and its suppression was an institutional failure, not a contractor error. A pause. Same for the other one, both of them on record. Not as a legal document, as an acknowledgement. She was quiet for a moment. I'll have it done by Friday, she said. Then we have an arrangement, he said. He hung up. She sat at her desk on the 42nd floor and looked at the mountains on the northern horizon, white-capped in November, patient and enormous, wearing their altitude the way they always had, without apology, without pretense, without any particular concern for what the people at the base of them chose to make of their existence. She thought about what Ethan had said on the satellite phone to Lily. I'm going to be okay. Not a promise. Just the truth, offered with as much certainty as honesty allowed. She thought she understood now what it meant to operate that way. Not the performance of confidence, not the executive projection of certainty she'd spent 20 years cultivating, but the specific earned clarity of a person who knew their own capacity and said exactly what that capacity allowed them to say, and not one word more. She had a company to run. She had a governance structure to implement. She had a board that was, 2 months into the restructuring, beginning to understand that what had initially looked like reputational damage was resolving into something different, a narrative about a company that had found its problems and fixed them. From the inside, in public, with a CEO who had stood in a boardroom and said the words, "I accept responsibility," without a lawyer next to her. That narrative was, in the specific language of corporate reputation, better than the one it replaced. Not because the failure was good. Because the response was honest. She had learned that, on a mountain. Months passed. Winter came to Hargrove the way it always did, quietly at first. A dusting on the upper slopes in November. A harder freeze in December. January, bringing the kind of cold that reminded you that the mountains were serious, and that the people who lived near them had made a specific decision about what they were willing to trade for the view. Ethan reviewed 4 project safety assessments between November and March. He filed 2 clean approvals with minor equipment recommendations. He filed 1 conditional approval with a mandatory infrastructure correction list that the project team addressed and resubmitted within 3 weeks. And he filed 1 stop. The stop was on a spring expedition project in New Mexico, a different property, different terrain, same structural pattern, trail infrastructure inadequately maintained, communication equipment insufficient for the elevation and terrain, emergency egress inadequate. His assessment went to every stakeholder simultaneously on a Monday morning at 8:43. The project stopped. There was no debate, no executive override request. No internal email chain characterizing the assessment as overly cautious. The stop authority document was referenced in the project team's acknowledgement, and the project was suspended pending infrastructure correction, and nobody called it hedging. Claire found out through the automatic notification system, the same way everyone else found out. She did not call Ethan to congratulate him or comment or check in. That was not the arrangement. The arrangement was that he did his job, and she ran her company, and the governance structure held the space between them, and kept both of them honest. So it held. In April, Claire flew to Colorado for the final walkthrough of the original wilderness property. The acquisition had not returned. That deal was gone. The sellers long since having closed with the competing offer and moved on. But the property the company already owned in the same corridor, the lower section of the original trail they had assessed, had been under renovation since January. New emergency shelters, redundant communication infrastructure, rebuilt trail markers, replaced equipment throughout. She arrived at the trailhead at 9 in the morning. She was not surprised to find Ethan's blue pickup already in the lot. She was not surprised to find him at the new emergency beacon installation near the trailhead entrance, crouched next to the housing with a small toolkit, checking the seal on the weatherproofing. She walked toward him. He heard her before she reached him, stood and turned. He looked the same. The same jacket, not faded quite as much. Now she suspected Lily had gotten to it with something, because the left shoulder area had a slightly different quality of wear than the rest. The same boots. He'd replaced the backpack. She could see it in the truck bed. Same style, newer. The shoulder looked level again. Both shoulders the same height. The physical residue of the debris field finally resolved back into function. She was glad. The beacon housing, he said, by way of greeting. The installer put the seal in backwards. It would have let moisture in within the first serious rain. Is it fixed? She said. It is now, he said. Good, she said. She looked at the new shelter structure to the left of the trailhead. Solid construction. Properly anchored. Emergency supply cabinet visible through the reinforced window. You signed off on this installation, she said. Last week, he said. The shelter passed. The communication relay on the upper bench passed. The trail marking system passed. The beacon housing is now fixed. He looked at the installation. The egress route signage on the northern edge needs 1 more reflective marker at the 40-meter point. I'll note it in the written assessment. Fine, she said. They stood in the April morning for a moment, the kind of comfortable silence that 2 people can hold when they've been in something significant together and have arrived, through the long, complicated work of aftermath, at a version of themselves that is changed by it and neither damaged nor diminished. You came out to see it, he said. I wanted to see it in person, she said. What it looks like when it's done right. He nodded. She looked at the trailhead, at the clean new markers, at the emergency shelter, at the communication equipment mounted on the access post with the proper weatherproofing now properly installed. at the egress route signage, clearly visible along the northern drainage approach. "It looks like a trail that people can come back from," she said. "Yes," he said. That's what it's supposed to look like." She turned to him. There was something she'd been holding since the parking lot in October, since the coffee at the Main Street Cafe, since the moment Lily had asked her whether she was staying for dinner, with the flat directness of a girl who knew exactly what she was asking. Something that was not in any governance document or board resolution or independent investigation finding. "You saved my life," she said. It was the same sentence from the helicopter. She was saying it again, here, on this trail, in this version of the place where it had happened. She was saying it again because it was still true, and because some things needed to be said more than once, in different pieces, before they fully arrived. He shook his head. "You saved yourself," he said. "When it mattered most, every call that counted. You made the right one. You ate the bar. You drank the water. You listened. You got up and walked 4 miles on a bad knee in the dark." He looked at her. "I just refused to leave you there." "That's not a small thing," she said. "No," he said, "it's not." She smiled. "Why did you disappear?" she said. "After the helicopter." Without saying goodbye, he looked toward the upper ridgeline. The same ridge she had watched him look toward a year and a half ago, from the overlook, when she'd had her phone out, and her board on the line, and her eyes everywhere, except where they needed to be. "Because you were safe," he said. She waited. He looked back at her. "And Lily was waiting," he said. She nodded. Slowly. The nod of a person who has received an answer that accounts for everything it was meant to account for, and asks nothing more of the person giving it. "Then I'll let you get back to her," she said. She started back toward the parking lot. She was 12 feet away when he said, "Claire." She stopped and turned. He was looking at her with the specific expression she had come to understand was his version of openness, not the performed openness of a man trying to seem accessible, but the genuine article, the look of someone who had decided to say the real thing instead of the manageable one. "The next warning that comes through your system," he said, "from any contractor, any safety assessor, any person in the field who writes something true and sends it to people who need to hear it." "Yes," she said. "Make sure someone reads it," he said. "All of it. The whole thing. Not the summary." She held his gaze. "I will," she said. He nodded once. He turned back to the beacon housing. She walked to her car. She sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. She looked at the trailhead in the windshield, the clean markers, the solid shelter, the equipment that was going to work when it needed to work, installed by people who had been told in writing and in governance documents and in the structural of architecture companies' operating agreements, that their job lot was to tell the truth, and that telling the truth would not cost them anything. She thought about the 14 pages she had not read. She thought about what 14 pages cost when they went unread. She thought about a corroded battery in a dead radio on a folding table, and a man who had placed it there quietly and waited, and what it looked like when the most important person in the room said 2 words that nobody understood the full weight of until they were already on the mountain. "I'll help you." She started the engine. She looked in the rearview mirror as she pulled out of the lot. Ethan was still at the beacon housing, tool in hand, doing the thing he always did, the work that needed doing, without theater, without anyone watching him, and thinking about what it meant. He did not look up as she drove away. He didn't need to. She was safe. She pointed the car south and drove through the April morning, with both hands on the wheel and the mountains filling the mirror behind her. And she thought about what she had understood on a Colorado ridgeline in September, in the dark, at 38 degrees, next to a man who had known for a year and a half exactly what this place needed and had been waiting, and the woman he was protecting with the particular patience of someone who understood that the right moment to say the most important thing was the moment when someone was finally ready to hear it. The most valuable person in the room is not always the person sitting at the head of the table. Sometimes it is the quiet one, the one everyone else has already looked past, the one whose 14 pages sat in a review folder for 3 weeks, while the deal moved forward, and the weather built on the ridgeline and the corroded battery sat in the dead radio on the table like a sentence that hadn't finished being spoken yet. Sometimes the person who saves your life does not want your gratitude. your title, or your office. They want to know that when they tell the truth, someone is finally going to read it. All of it. To the last page. And this time she had